Hello, everyone. Thanks for giving us your time today for VR Download. I'm Ian Hamilton in New York, joined by David Heaney from London in the UploadVR studios as we discuss the next steps in personal computing. We're wearing last generation meta avatars with our hands tracked by the headset's cameras, and we're using the built-in microphones. We're live here on YouTube on October 17th. We've got tablets in front of us to see live comments and interact with our audience. And I want to give a personal thank you to our patrons, including Mike Manzano, HoloNet, Podum, that's the Smash Drums developer, and XR Developer News for supporting us directly. You can become a member or patron at UploadVR.com, and thank you to our YouTube members as well for supporting the work of our journalists as we bring you the latest information, verified by our eyes and ears. I'm wearing a Quest 3. David, what are you wearing on your head today, and what topics are we covering?
I am wearing the Quest 3S. So we're going to talk about that at the end of today's show. That will be our big discussion topic, given that it just launched, and we plan to have a review up later this week. But we're going to have 4 separate sections of the show today. Firstly, we have a little bit of miscellaneous news. Shiftall announced yet another MeganeX headset after not shipping the first 2. Maybe third time's the charm. We'll find out. We'll then talk about my Vive Focus Vision hands-on impressions. It just launched today, and on UploadVR.com we have impressions, and that's HTC's latest headset, where their consumer pitch is that it offers lossless PC VR via the DisplayPort adapter accessory, though of course that's still through Fresnel lenses. We will then talk about the report from Bloomberg that suggests the non-Pro Apple Vision headset, the first non-Pro Apple Vision headset, could cost about $2,000. So that would be quite a significant decrease from Vision Pro, but still nowhere near Quest pricing. We will then have a general meta stuff section where we talk about Meta's CTO's comments about why porting games from Quest to Orion glasses or any AR glasses of that kind will not be easy, and why there are actually significant differences between those two device classes. We'll then talk about Meta CTO confirming the earlier reporting that we've discussed multiple times in this show about a Quest Pro 2 candidate for 2027 being cancelled, and work on an ultralight headset for that same year. So confirming those reports. We will then talk about the fact that Meta's Avalanche cloud VR streaming system was briefly listed on the Horizon store, and what that might mean about a potential launch in cloud streamed VR in general. We will talk about Horizon OS UI set. Meta finally has a Quest UI kit for Unity. Developers don't have to completely roll their own UI just to make a simple app. Then we will talk about Motorola. Motorola phones will soon be usable in VR on Quest's Horizon OS. I'm sure there'll be lots of jokes about, oh yes, all 7 people who own one of those will be very happy with that, but we'll discuss what that might mean in the long term. Then before we do get into our final section about Quest 3S, which again is at the end in our main topic, we will have a brief keyboard section. We'll talk about 2 stories, one about real keyboards and one about virtual keyboards. The first being that Quest V71 seems set to bring pass-through cutout for any keyboard the headset sees. So it'll pass-through cutout regardless of what your keyboard is, even if it's not connected to the headset. Then we will talk about that research that Meta and ETH Zurich researchers showed off over the weekend, saying that they have solved the problem of turning any surface into a keyboard, and what that might mean for productivity on headsets and glasses, especially on the go. Then, as I keep teasing and alluding to, we will have our Quest 3S section. We will talk about the fact that it launched this week, how well it might be doing. We'll talk about its specs compared to previous Meta headsets and compared to Apple Vision Pro and Pico 4 and Vive Focus Vision. And we'll talk about the article we put out ahead of our review, talking about the one thing that it does better than Quest 3. Well, you could say the other thing is having an action button, but the one really important thing it does better than Quest 3, despite being cheaper, which is, of course, low light hand tracking. And in any conditions other than ideal lighting, how Quest 3S is actually the best hand tracking headset from Meta to date.
Yeah, I'm looking over our comments here. We've got Biggs and a couple other members here tuned in today. Where are they? Let's see. Ryan, thank you for tuning in. And I noticed Guy Godin, the creator of Virtual Desktop, is in there giving us some perspective on the sales numbers that he's seeing. Very interesting journey for Virtual Desktop, right? This is a different time in the market for him, right? He's competing against Steam Link, competing against Meta's own built-in solution, and basically seeing differences in the sales numbers combined with the Quest 3S being just so focused on being a low-cost game console and bringing in that audience rather than like that high-end PC market that was sort of the legacy of VR so far. But let's move right through this show as quickly as we can because we've got some big discussions to have on some of these topics. Shiftall, I loved your headline on this one, David, kind of summarizing it right up front for people, what people should be thinking about with this announcement. Why don't you break it down for us?
Yeah, sure. First, to reply to a few comments, yes, I am using the Quest 3S built-in microphone, so please let us know how that is. You may know, if you're a regular viewer of this show, that I'm actually unable to use the Quest 3 or Quest Pro on this show because their microphones have this plosive popping issue. And in my testing, at least, it appeared that the 3S fixes this issue. So I'm actually very glad to now be in an XR2 Gen 2 headset in this show regularly. And even being here right now, we'll talk about it at the end, but it's just nicer to have everything higher resolution and smoother. And, we run at 120 hertz on this. So it's just nice to really kind of have that. And even my tablet's faster responding. The difference between Quest 2 and Quest 3S from performance, I can say as the person that developed this studio, is genuinely enormous. So it's great to have this quality of life improvement for myself. But less about me for a second. Let's talk about this news. Shiftall, as we said, has announced yet another MeganeX headset, and it didn't ship the last two. So this company used to be a subsidiary of Panasonic until earlier this year. Panasonic sold it off to a Japanese company that's hard to even classify. It's pretty much a company that seems to do all kinds of things. So I don't know how to classify that, but it's not a well-known company. Shiftall says it's still working with Panasonic on this new headset. These two being its previous headsets that it announced it's been talking about since CES 2022, didn't ship it. Then last year earlier this year, it announced this thing, the MeganeX Superlight. Now it's gone out the window. It's not shipping this. And instead they've said, look over here, we've got a new headset. It's MeganeX Superlight 8K. And of course, like all companies that say their headset is 8K, it's actually 3.5K per eye micro OLED. So this thing does have fascinating specs, right? They say that the visor itself here, excluding the Halo strap system, weighs just 185 grams, which would make it one of the lightest headsets ever. It has motorized lens separation adjustments. You adjust it in software, but the lenses move motorized. It's going to be $1,900, and this is a PC VR headset that uses Steam VR tracking. So on top of that, you need to add obviously your gaming PC, as well as base stations and Valve Index controllers if you want VR controllers. So this is obviously a very expensive product, but it does pack some very heavy claimed specs. They also say they've worked with NVIDIA to allow high dynamic range in Steam VR on PC on this headset, which is something we haven't really seen from other headsets. And as part of that NVIDIA partnership, it seems that there's been some conditions here because they claim this thing will not work with AMD graphics cards at all. I don't know if that's actually true or if it's just something they're saying through a partnership with NVIDIA, but that is what they claim. So this thing is kind of taking the concept of Big Screen Beyond, being a very compact and light PC VR headset, except it's adjustable lenses instead of fixed lenses, and it has 3.5K micro OLEDs instead of 2.5K. But of course, it's also almost twice the price of Big Screen Beyond, and we don't know if this thing is actually going to ship.
Yeah, so I'm remembering my early demo of the Panasonic. It was Panasonic, right?
They were a subsidiary of Panasonic. They used that IP. They say they're still working with that IP, but they're now no longer part of Panasonic.
Yeah, so when I wrote that headline, I was very proud of myself for my take on it because it was a cool idea. It had a little dial right in the middle between your eyes that you could split. You could rotate basically to separate mechanically the distance between the lenses. Very ingenious, cool solution to IPD adjustment. But when I wrote that headline, the takeaway was this was a headset in search of a platform. And I'm not seeing anything here that indicates anything new. Like, why did they not ship the first two? And it feels like this platform problem is probably contributing to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a Steam VR headset, right? It's like big screen beyond. The platform is the PC. They're selling hardware here, not software. I really don't know what's gone on with the other two headsets. It's very, very hard to grasp here. With those, I don't think they actually did take pre-order money, whereas now they actually have open pre-orders for this thing and they're taking money. So they are making a commitment now to ship to people. Another interesting feature they've added, again, on the left here, you see the original headset from years ago, then the one they were going to ship earlier this year, which, to be honest, doesn't even look real. It looks like a concept. At least this one looks a bit more real, though, of course, I would note that these still do appear to just be photoshopped onto a model, right? Even the images here where they show the flip-up design, which is very interesting, that they would argue who needs pass-through when you can just flip the headset up. These are clearly just photoshopped onto a model. The lighting doesn't even match, which doesn't bring much confidence. I wouldn't pre-order this thing. I would not risk my money with this company before it shows the ability to actually deliver a headset. But to go on complete devil's advocate here, if they can deliver it, this is a very, very interesting piece of hardware, right? It does deliver on a lot of what big screen, it would, to be clear, if it does arrive, deliver on a lot of what big screen beyond delivers on, except even higher end from specs perspective, and with the ability to adjust the lenses and have a flip up design, which PC VR enthusiasts would be quite interested in this if it does arrive as promised.
Yeah, so putting this in context of some of the ongoing things we cover, Guy Godin asking this core question here: have they taken pre-order money from users? David, do you know the answer to that question?
I know they've opened pre-orders. I'm not 100% sure whether they've actually taken the money yet, or whether it's they take the money on shipping. We'll look into that, but I do know they have opened pre-orders.
Yeah, so that fits into our longer sort of way we cover things at UploadVR, and Guy sort of holding us to task to follow that thread, because buying VR headsets is a tricky thing. Like, everyone wants an underdog to succeed against Meta. There's like an overall feeling out there in the market. You've got a long history here of Lynx, Immersed, where we've covered these efforts again and again and again, while putting all of those cautionary things in front of our audience. This commenter here saying that everyone's going to forget about this headset after the stream also feels appropriate to just bring up in this context. Anything else you want to talk about in the comments there before we move on?
Yeah, I'm having a look at the comments here. A funny comment from David Bigelow, looking forward to finally seeing the Lynx MeganeX Visor Deca Gear, a 20-foot tall transformer robot that they form when joined together. I think that's kind of playing on what you're saying. There are a lot of these underdog stories here. With this company, they do have the Panasonic IP. These lenses are developed by Panasonic still, even though they're not a subsidiary, they're still using that tech. They're using BOE panels, likely the same or similar to what is being used in Immersed's visor. I guess the only thing we can really say is that we'll have a close eye on this and check to see whether they actually do ship those pre-orders. And until then, there's not much more we can really say about this.
Yeah, so I appreciate our audience working with us here on the skepticism, balancing that skepticism with sort of interest, like watching with interest, and then also warning people not to put their money into ideas that aren't ready, or we haven't really seen enough evidence to throw our money behind. So our audience is part of you can also help those new commenters sort out what games they get into, what headsets they buy, and help them save their money and wait for the right time. So we depend on some of our commenters in our audience to kind of have that ongoing conversation with people. We're going to talk about the Vive Focus Vision hands-on. You called this lossless PC VR through Fresnel lenses.
Yeah, that is the balance here. This headset launches today. If you weren't around for our episode a few weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago now, where we discussed the announcement of this thing, it is a refresh of the Vive Focus 3, but it is being sold to consumers. It has added stereo pass-through cameras, eye tracking, and support for lossless PC VR through a DisplayPort adapter that is sold separately for $150. So the total all-in price here to use this thing as a lossless PC VR headset is $1,150. And on the surface, that is an interesting pitch. There are PC VR enthusiasts not happy with the lossy compression of using a Quest headset or a Pico headset on PC. And so HTC is kind of saying to those people, well, here's a headset that it does work as standalone, right? It still is a standalone headset, but if you want to use it on PC, you can plug this in with a DisplayPort cable and get a lossless image. And obviously I went to try it out at HTC's launch event here. The lighting was not ideal, so excuse the photo. It was a very dim room, but you still get the idea that it's using a DisplayPort cable. So they had 3 demo stations set up, 2 of them standing with Arizona Sunshine 2, and another seated with Automobilista 2, the racing game. With the 2 standing up Arizona Sunshine 2 demos, I noticed this strange issue where there was like a display frame drop every few seconds when rotating my head. And as I noted in the article, most modern VR users have never actually experienced a real display frame drop, because when you get a frame drop on a headset, what happens is the compositor rotationally reprojects the previous frame, so that sure it'll feel a little bit juddery because it's not positionally accurate. Yes, sometimes the compositors do a little bit of positional reprojection too, but it's not a real new positional frame. But you'll never get that everything is actually rotationally juddering because of that asynchronous reprojection, which has been around since 2015. It's not that this doesn't have that in standalone and PC. It does. It's just that something was happening here on the display cable itself, where a DisplayPort frame was actually being dropped, and so that obviously meant that I couldn't test the full experience on the Arizona Sunshine station. So HTC told me that this was a known issue with pre-release cables, and that this would not be an issue in the release system. Now, we don't know if that's the case. We'll have to keep an eye on what owners report. But in that 3rd demo station, the seated sim racing station, I didn't experience this issue at all. And I did really test for it. I stopped the car and I rotated my head and checked. So their claim there is that 2 out of 3 cables had this issue, and that the 3rd didn't. Again, I don't know whether that's true or not. But to get to the actual experience of using this when it did work, this is in the center of the lens a higher quality PC VR experience than what you would get from a Quest 3. And there's 2 reasons for that. One is, of course, the lossless image. You're not getting compression. And what people don't really realize about compression is that it's not even the kind of blockiness that you can sometimes get that is the real issue there. It's also that it compresses the color space. The compression that's used in all of these headsets actually brings down the color space a little bit. So it is refreshing to not have that. The other aspect is that this thing just has higher resolution panels than Quest 3 in the first place. Quest 3 is using 2K LCD panels, and this thing is using 2.5K. It's the same resolution, roughly, a little bit lower than big screen Beyond. But of course, Beyond is micro OLED. This is LCD. So in the center of the lens, you do in fact get what HTC is marketing here, a higher quality PC VR image quality than what you would get on a Quest or a Pico, right? Of course, the problem is that this is through Fresnel lenses. So when you rotate your eyes, that's obviously you're getting a lot of blur there that you wouldn't get with pancake lenses. The other issue is that if you're in any kind of dark scene with high contrast images, you're going to get like very harsh Fresnel glare, and it's really worse on HTC's lenses than on Meta's. Like on Quest 3S, you do get a little bit of Fresnel glare, but on Vive, Focus 3, and Focus Vision, it's really harsh. If you're on like a loading screen with this thing, it's actually awful, to be fair. But if you're in a sim racing game, you're not really experiencing that a lot, in this specific use case. So that's only in that kind of specific scenario. The one thing I would say about this has over the Fresnel lenses of Quest 3S is that it's not really a factor of the lenses themselves, but the headset, is that these are precisely adjustable. And because this has eye tracking, it actually has completely automatic IPG adjustment, just like Apple Vision Pro and Pico 4 Enterprise, a headset, which you've probably never used or even seen. It's automatic IPD adjustment is one of those things that will just be a part of every headset eventually, right? Maybe it's part of Quest 4. If not, it'll be part of Quest 5. But that means you put the headset on, and just like on a Vision Pro, if you've used that, the lenses just move to where your eyes are to be aligned horizontally pretty much perfectly, right? That's all automatic. You don't have to mess with the dial. So in that way, if your IPD is slap bang on one of the three settings of Quest 2 or Quest 3S, this isn't an advantage. But if you're one of those people where your IPD is actually between the three settings of Quest 2 and Quest 3S, this is going to be a more comfortable visual experience for you, actually. But again, we're not in a market where those are the only options. I'm just going to finish by saying that the problem with this thing is that there are competitors, right? You could get a Pimax Crystal Light for cheaper with higher resolution screens and better lenses. You could get a PlayStation VR 2 with PC adapter for half the price with the punchy colors and contrast of OLED, or you could obviously just opt for a Quest 3 and Pico if you're fine with the compression. HTC's angle here, and the one thing I would give them is that this has eye tracking built in that works on PC VR. You can add for $100 face tracking. It slots in right here. There's a little USB-C port right there. So you don't even use the main USB-C port. Bam, face tracking. And then this thing natively supports the Vive Ultimate trackers for body tracking. So the one market I think they could maybe kind of get here is if you're a VR chat player, you want to have easy face and eye tracking, body tracking, and you don't like compression. Otherwise, I don't see this as competitive.
Yeah, so very interesting comments sort of all over the board here. There's people talking about the Steam headset. They want to see a Valve headset, the thing that's we know is in the works. We've seen multiple job listings. We've been covering it for a very long time. And then people talking about the value of DisplayPort versus, say, Virtual Desktop and their latest, Geek Odin's latest sort of streaming solution. And of course, then you've got the lenses, right? So Quest 3 and Quest 3 has market leading lenses right now with just super wide like you get clarity in a super large area of your field of view. And then you combine that whole pathway that I just outlined there of Virtual Desktop doing wireless with the latest codecs. It's people debating what's better and compared to this older DisplayPort tech. And I saw this comment of just what's it going to take to get wireless DisplayPort quality, this core question here of what's going to do that. And that brings us full circle to the Valve question of are they going to produce something like this? I think it's really interesting to watch what Valve is doing with Steam Link. Valve is making great strides with its Steam Link platform. And when I see Steam Link, I see the future of Steam's operating system, of Steam's whole system in what they're doing with Steam Link overall. So, Valve is still doing amazing things out there. One question I had for you on this one, David, do you know if the IPD adjustment is independent of each eye? Can you get an irregular IPD out of this?
That's something we don't know yet. I have asked that, and we'll get a follow-up question. It's very nice on Vision Pro. Just noticing my internet connection is kind of going a little bit unstable there, so let me know if my voice goes off. When it comes to your question of wireless, how do we get lossless quality in a wireless solution? Well, we kind of did have that in the past. That's what the Vive wireless adapter was. You could get that for Vive and Vive Pro and Vive Pro 2 and all of those headsets. The problem is when you're doing that, you're ramping up the cost, and you generally need a directional signal. So you can't have any breaking of the line of sight between the transmitter, and you need a transmitter. This is not going to be able to be done easily through your home Wi-Fi network and the headset. And then you end up having to get this thing strapped to the top of your head with a transmitter that goes on your wall. It's an interesting question to say, will we get to the point where, Wi-Fi 7 and maybe Wi-Fi 8 can just do that much throughput on 6 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz? Maybe, but especially if you can do like eye-tracked foveated encoding and things like that. But for now, we're kind of in the situation where if you want lossless, you're going to get wired. I think I'll let you talk for a bit while I just going on with that's what I did. Yeah.
feature standard and adopted by developers on PC VR, hand tracking, eye tracking, pass-through. I think the interesting thing to consider there is just the alignment between Valve and the open XR standard that's developed. So like, I think there's a lot of overlap there between just Valve not interested too much in anything that isn't aligned entirely with that open standard that's gone across the industry. We've seen some really interesting things this week. We just put a review of Maestro up over on UploadVR.com. Go check out that review. Our reviewer, Don Hopper, described that as one of the first games, or the first game that he's played, that he prefers hand tracking to controller tracking. And one of the things we were diving into there as we looked at that is, well, what is the Steam version of Maestro? How does that work? And there's a really interesting path there to think about of whether you go and buy the Maestro on Quest or you go buy Maestro on Steam, which is the more useful purchase for you over the long term. And there's a good pitch for Maestro being really, really useful on standalone because of just how great the hand tracking is. Do we want to move on here? Is there any comments you want to get into before we talk about the non-pro Apple headset?
Just having a look at some of the comments here. Someone asked, was the Vive wireless adapter 5 gigahertz? No, it was 60 gigahertz. So you need to go up to that kind of frequency to do lossless. Geek Odin pointing out that the issue of compression, so whether it be Steam Link, Virtual Desktop, AirLink, even USB Link, the issue of compression having compressed color space is a problem with Qualcomm's chipsets. So there's no magic software fix possible there. Maybe we'll see that in future, right? Maybe the XR2 Gen 3 that goes into Quest 4 will support that. I mean, one thing I would say, though, is I still think for the majority of people, I've said this before, the compression isn't really that much of an issue on these headsets. If you're using an ideal setup, right? If you have Virtual Desktop, you're using the AV1 codec on a latest generation NVIDIA GPU, and you have a Wi-Fi 6E setup where you're near your router and you have your PC wired to it. If you have all of those ducks in a row, I actually don't think that the majority of people care about this. I think that you get an image quality that is good enough that being wireless is a better trade-off there, right? It is. I still do think that Mark Zuckerberg was right when he was asked in an earnings call, I believe, a few years ago, of whether he thought PlayStation VR2 was going to be this like massive disruption that would kind of take over the Quest market, because, you know, Sony gaming, PlayStation investor thinks surely they're going to win this. And he said, you know, I just don't think that consumers are going to go for wired VR at scale. And I think that's probably true. I think the people who are okay with wired VR have already bought into VR. And one of the number one reasons you see from people interested in VR is I'll wait for it to be wireless, or at least you saw back in the day a few years ago, before all these solutions that made it wireless feasible were a thing. And, you know, we have our Don Hopper here, VR Gamer Dude, in the comments saying, I barely notice it anymore that now that I have a 4090 with the setup David just mentioned. Yeah, I just don't think this is a huge issue. And so we do have a kind of detractor here, PH Wizard, saying, I agree that most don't care about the compression, but I really do. And I'd love to know from you, PH Wizard, are you using the setup I mentioned? Because if you're using an older generation NVIDIA GPU or an AMD GPU, your encoder is actually not as high quality. And if you're not using the AV1 codec, you're using a codec that isn't as high quality. So it is, what's the right word here? Finicky. You have to have all of these ducks in a row. Whereas with this, the pitch is you just plug it into your PC's DisplayPort and you don't have to think about all that stuff. But I think we are going to get into a world where more and more people have that, right? Wi-Fi 7 is going to proliferate, and then we will, you know, Pico 4 Ultra already supports Wi-Fi 7, and presumably Quest 4 will, right? I think that's pretty much a given that Quest 4 would support Wi-Fi 7. We're going to see, you know, as people get near GPUs, their encoder is going to get good. They'll have an AV1 encoder. So, you know, I suspect that we won't need fancy transmitters, that GPU encoders and Wi-Fi will all just, and of course the other component being the chipsets on these headsets, the decoder in them, all of these things are just going to get better and better over time, to the point where like 95%, even 99% of even PC gamers just pick the wireless solution.
A couple things I just want to just bring up. It's not 2024 and going into 2025, 2026 as these next lines of headsets come out. It's not the same VR market that a lot of the PC VR users that are veterans of the industry. It's not going to be the same technology stack or like game developers go to look at Flat to VR, go look at Team Beef. They have made enormous strides in blurring the lines between what is made for VR and what is made for flat screen. And I'm seeing so much in our comments of just people talking about the different ways the companies are trying to push more pixels or like cut corners to get their stuff into you quicker. I wanted to talk about this one comment. This basic question from where was it? Kid Blaze asking HDMI link. How is the compression there? So that's a good opportunity to discuss like a completely different, like a simpler way of getting stuff into the headset. The compression is actually quite bad by comparison to everything else, except so you could maybe call it a 20% loss in quality when you see that compression of using the Quest HDMI link to bring an external display source into your Quest 3 or Quest 3S. It's a significant loss in quality. However, you're not dealing with head-based latency then. You're not dealing with actually making a person sick because their head movements don't match up to their environment and everything they see exactly right. So you as a person or viewer can withstand that loss of compression better than you can stand a 20% loss in quality of compression straight to your head of everything you see. So that is there, and I just wanted to bring that up. And we ready to talk about Apple yet?
Yeah, I think we just want to quickly touch on latency there because we're seeing some people in the comments ask about what might fix that, because we talked about quality here, but the obvious problem with compression, whether that be through a USB cable or Wi-Fi, is that you're adding some latency. And there's some misconception out there that the latency is something to do with the network, which isn't quite true, as Virtual Desktop's developer Guy Godin is pointing out in our comments. So Wi-Fi 7 will help with like stability in things like that, in rare network conditions and poor network conditions, I should say. But when it comes to the latency, this is really a problem of the encoders and decoders, because to compress this video stream, to make it smaller to fit through USB or Wi-Fi, takes time. It takes computation, which takes time. And so we have like a generally illustrative graph here. This is not perfectly to scale. This is just generally illustrative, where you see that in Quest 3, for example, the decoder gets better. So once you get a better decoder, you have a less time to decode the signal, and then you have lower latency, right? Because the time from your PC rendering this to getting onto your headset is lower. So if we see Quest 4 get an even better, faster decoder, you then shave some off this. Wi-Fi 7, you shave a little bit off this, right? But it's not hugely significant. And then these display and other problems are the same time of latency you would have even when you're doing standalone or DisplayPort, right? These parts don't go away. It's just these three middle parts that are inherent in compression streaming. And Don Hopper, UploadVR's Don Hopper in the comments, pointing out something interesting I wanted to bring up, that people used to have the same arguments over wired controllers versus wireless controllers, and now it's very rare for me to see anyone plug a controller in. Yeah, it's the same thing with keyboard and mice and controllers. When we went from like the PlayStation 2 era of wired gamepads into the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 era, there were people saying, that this would never work with too much latency. And, when's the last time you've seen someone plug a gamepad into a console?
Yeah, let's move on to the vision section. We've got viewers building on this episode, I think. I think we might end up with quite a few by the end of this. This is following our sort of model here where we tend to build up the audience towards the end of the show. And I think that there's a good likelihood of new Quest 3S owners in our audience. If you're a new Quest 3S owner this week, shout out in the comments, ask for game recommendations, ask for tips. We have a very supportive community out there who can help you find your way around the VR marketplaces. Let's talk about this non-pro Apple Vision headset that will reportedly be about $2,000. This $2,000 is going to be uh, uh, I imagine people fighting about it in our comments, because whether it's $3,500 or whether it's $2,000, that is still outside of the realm of affordability for many, many, many people. Yet it's it's still going to open up a larger market for Apple at the same time. David, why don't you break this down for us? What we think this might lose to achieve that $2,000 price?
Yeah, we've seen multiple reports, I think 3 or 4 different sources now over the past few years, even actually before Vision Pro released, talking about this first cheaper non-Pro Vision headset. Apple put a clue out there in the name of Apple Vision Pro that this is not going to be the entry product range. The Pro is there for a reason. What they end up calling this cheaper headset, we don't know. It could just be Apple Vision. It could be Apple Vision Air. But the reports we've seen so far, including Bloomberg's Mark Gurman, who brings us this new report, and Gurman was accurate about almost everything he said about Vision Pro before Apple even announced it. So he has a strong track record then of getting these things right in advance, is saying that he expects this to land at about $2,000. And he's repeated his previous reporting that said that what this might do to achieve that price is firstly drop the eyesight front display. So that display that shows a rendered view of your eyes to make it seem like it's a transparent display to others in the room. Gurman's reporting that Apple will likely drop that. Also, it will likely use an A series chip instead of a M series chip. So you have the M2 in Vision Pro. We talked last week or the week before, I can't remember exactly which, about how a supply chain analyst said that Apple will refresh Vision Pro with an M5 chip. It looks like on this cheaper range, they're going to use the A series chip from iPhones. And because A series have advanced so much since the M2, we're now going to be onto the A19 next year, and the A19 Pro, which presumably will land in the iPhone 17. They've actually kind of caught up to the point where in a lower power chip, which means they can have a less heavy and expensive cooling array, that they can use a smaller battery, for example, to achieve the same performance and battery life as the original Vision Pro, but in a cheaper headset. And the other thing they are reportedly going to do, according to Gurman, is use cheaper materials. So whereas Vision Pro is this device made out of aluminium and glass, the cheaper Vision will presumably use plastic. And that actually has a huge advantage to it, which is that it would be lighter. One of the advantages of using aluminium and glass in Vision Pro is that it feels premium. Picking up a Vision Pro, there's really no other headset like it. It genuinely feels so far beyond them in terms of just how premium it feels. But that has a huge effect on when you actually put it on your head, which is what matters. It's a very heavy headset. We actually saw a report from a Chinese news outlet a few months ago suggesting that this non-Pro Vision headset could be around 400 grams. And that compares to the 600 or so grams of the original Vision Pro. So if Apple is able to put out a headset that is $1,500 cheaper and 200 grams lighter, that could be a huge moment for the Vision headset line and for Vision OS and the Vision OS ecosystem, including developers. And Gurman's report finishes by saying that they claim that he claims that Apple expects this to sell twice as many units as Vision Pro. And we think Vision Pro is on track to sell somewhere on the order of 500,000 units. So this one could be the first Vision Pro, first Vision headset to sell more than 1 million units.
Yeah, so very interesting discussion about those price points in our comments here. There's people talking about 1,500 being a sweet spot. That's in my mind as a really wonderful number to hit for an all headset that does everything. There's one here from Craig sort of making a prediction here, and they're talking about it needing a Mac. And that's the problem with that is we believe we've got reporting that Apple killed a headset that kind of broke apart the rendering that way, that used your Mac locally and needed to use the headset. What they arrived at was this in-between solution where let's remove the weight from the head so that you don't have to pack that all onto the head. Let's put it in a battery pack on your side. And that was kind of their debut solution. I don't see them abandoning that until they can. until they can do standalone all just in the visor on your head, I would imagine the battery pack in your pocket is probably going to be the way they're going to go for the next couple units, maybe. What do you think? What do you think on that, David?
Yeah, so a few points here. Firstly, when it comes to the release date, we're having Afrobadger in our comments ask what the ETA for this is. According to this report, 2025, so presumably late next year. When it comes to pricing, you're saying $1,500 might be that sweet spot. I agree. I think $1,200 is where it gets really, really compelling, where you get to MacBook Air pricing and iPad Pro. But what I think we will see here is a gradual reduction in the Vision headset product line's pricing. The entry price today is $3,500. With this headset, it'll be reportedly around 2,000, and then maybe the next version of the non-Pro Vision a few years down the line comes at 1,500, and then maybe a few years after that they get to 1,000. This is going to be a long journey. Just as we always say on this show, we're still in the early days of AR, VR, MR, spatial computing, whatever the hell you want to call it, and this is going to be a gradual journey. These things, as much as many media narratives want everything to be the moment, this is the big moment, there is no big moment. It just all happens gradually and step by step. We will see this product line get better, cheaper, faster. When it comes to will they completely change the design of the product? Will they rely on an iPhone or a Mac? As you say, Ian, reportedly, yes, the original plan for the Vision headset was to have a wireless box that would kind of be like a wireless console that would actually do the heavy rendering, and the headset would be this thin client. And then Johnny Ive, Apple's longtime designer who recently left, apparently quote unquote balked at the idea, and they went to a mostly standalone design. I think it's very unlikely, given the architecture of Vision OS, given the value of portability. I think it's unlikely that we see them do that, right? Look at what they're pitching this around. You take this thing on an airplane and you put it in your bag, you take it out, and you've got your private cinema screen for an 8-hour flight. You can do, spatial computing in bed, take your keyboard and have your full setup with multiple monitors. Vision headsets, Vision Pro so far is heavily enhanced by having a Mac. To do real computing, you do need a Mac, but the idea of making it rely on one just seems unlikely, but not only because you wouldn't actually really save that much weight. You still need to do things like pass-through on board, right? For basic latency reasons, it's going to be it's essentially impossible to offload that kind of compute. And that's still already generating heat and taking computing power. You don't actually get to a much cheaper and lighter headset, right? Think of what your Quest 3 is already doing when you're using Virtual Desktop or Steam Link. That's the situation, right? But you still need that chipset on board to do the decoding, the tracking, the pass-through, all of these system features. And I can't see Apple completely abandoning that. Or at the very least, we haven't seen any reporting suggesting that they're actually building a product right now to do that.
So Ben Goodson's question here, quick question for those with both. Is the Vision Pro $3,000 better than the Quest 3? I appreciate Show Futuristic's response. No. I think it would be, that was my gut reaction to just flat no. I bet David would be a flat no, because we'll do the asterisk on it. We'll give you context, but would it be a quick no from you too?
Of course not, but it's not 7 times better. But it's better, right? Like the micro OLED, the near 4K micro OLED displays absolutely blow away any 2K LCD that you get in your Quest, right? And Vision OS is a completely unique thing. Eye tracking allows for the gaze and pinch interaction system that is just for simple tasks, like you're just picking out a movie to watch or something like that, just light years ahead of fumbling around with hand tracking controllers. But it's a worse gaming device, right? You don't have track controllers. It's got a narrower field of view. It's not better in every way, but like fundamentally, there's a reason it's $3,500. They didn't just put together the same cost of goods as Quest 3 and put a $3,000 markup on it. It's that price for a reason, but it's also not 7 times better.
Yeah, the question becomes, what do you as a user want to use it for? What is your purpose? And that's when you start answering that question holistically. Like that's what Zuckerberg claim that that's how Zuckerberg claims and gets a bunch of fanboys to back him on the idea that Quest 3 is the better product, period. Because he is incorporating everything to consider when making that $500 purchase for like a Quest 3 in comparison to these things that Apple has released or put into this headset that it thinks it wants to bring the price down on over generational changes. They want to bring by all indications, OLED down in price by manufacturing scale. Like, let's bring 2 more factories online to ship more of these displays. Let's put this external eye display on the headset and figure out that new display technology and bring the price down on that over time. And then there's the developers who are going and buying this thing to invest in their own future for building for the future headsets that Apple has done. So this is, think of Apple. You have to think of Apple as this giant ship, giant ship that's having to change direction now from traditional PCs, traditional iPhones to VR. The VR journey we've been on for a decade here at UploadVR, that they're trying to shift their big giant boat in the direction of VR. And by all indications, Meta and Apple both share the same long-term journey of AR. They think of AR as the end goal, this super slim, socially acceptable device you can wear everywhere you go. But until the physics and engineering ever make that see-through thing feasible, it looks like VR headsets with pass-through are going to be the future. And I like that analogy because that's the analogy. Meta calls itself MetaMates. They consider themselves a little ship going through the waters too. And it's that's the future of our technology displayed between these two companies and their strategy.
Yeah, for sure. And as Apple brings down its pricing, it's going to be more and more competition for Meta. Apple has always been able to charge higher prices than other companies, right? So it's conceivable that a $1,500 Apple headset could sell as well as a $500 Meta headset. You don't need to take those exact numbers as gospel, but the point is that Apple, when they do eventually get to that pricing, which is not going to be with this headset, reportedly this is going to be $2,000, they will start to become more and more competition. And we've seen Meta scramble to make the Horizon OS operating system competitive with Vision OS's use cases, right? We've seen the spatial computing thing of placing windows wherever you want. We've seen Prime Video allowing you to download content. We still don't see 3D movies, right? One of the best things about Vision Pro that I didn't even mention there is Disney Plus and Apple TV. You can watch 3D movies in a way that blows away any 3D cinema or TV you've ever tried. It's truly like when you watch it, you feel sad that every movie isn't in 3D, and it's a deeply richer and better cinema experience. All of these kind of little things. Unless you have anything else to add, Ian, I just wanted to respond to one more comment here.
Well, yeah, I like Ben Goodson's comment asking, Apple really aren't known for lowering the cost of goods over time, are they? And I think you are misremembering. I think they are known. What they do is they differentiate the product lines. They find ways to have products that exist at different price points, and you can see it going back to the iPod.
Yeah, the iPod is a perfect example, right? You had the iPod, and then you had the iPod Mini and the iPod Nano and the iPod Shuffle. And that was back in the Jobsian era where Steve Jobs was very focused on market share. People don't even remember that in the iDevices. He cared about the iPhone's market share in a way that modern Apple doesn't. Modern Apple cares about the iPhone's profit. They would rather make more profit on a smaller market. Jobs didn't. But I do think when at this price, they kind of have to care about that, right? 3,500, we will completely acknowledge over and over again on this podcast, is a ridiculous price that for the vast majority of people might as well be a joke. Like that is, if you tell the average person that this thing is $3,500, they look at you like you have 3 heads, right? It's ridiculous. This, to ever be a mass market product, this thing does need to be, as the commenters are saying, below $1,500, but that's going to take a long time.
I have a very extreme thought on this subject of VR headsets replacing cars, and I'm alone in this area of arguing that work from home is the solution for the future, and companies just need to reform around the idea that those high output workers are not coming back no matter what you do, and VR headsets are a solution for that. It's just you have to restructure your entire company and policies around that fact. And when you start getting those people on the bandwagon, $3,500 suddenly becomes a necessity for your work. That starts changing people's perception of all this stuff. But we do need to move on through this episode because we got so many subjects.
Yeah, just a few more comments to bring up here. Guy Godin is saying the difference is Vision Pro could eventually replace your Mac, whereas the Quest 3 never will. unless Apple dramatically changed their software strategy, I actually disagree with that strongly. Vision OS is based on iPad OS and it has all the same limitations. I can't run a real coding IDE on Vision OS. I can't run Premiere Pro, Photoshop. I can't run Unity. I can't run Unreal Engine. It is not a real computer in the same way that nor is Quest, right? You still need a Mac connected to your Vision Pro for now. Maybe one day, and I hope they do, Apple revamps Vision OS to run Mac OS apps and have Mac OS features. Maybe make it exclusive to the Vision Pro and not the Vision Air, but that would be a changer and be able to replace a Mac. But their current software strategy makes it as much as a Mac replacement as an iPad Pro, which is, for the vast majority of people, not at all. Now, the final question I wanted to bring up was from Eon, who said, curious how Orion's existence will affect Vision Line. Surely 99% of people are going to wait it out for glasses form factor or anything AR. Now it's been shown it's achievable. You have, those are fighting words on this podcast, but we will wait to get into that in our next subject. Actually, that perfectly brings us on to our next subject, which is Meta's CTO explaining why it will be very difficult to port Quest mixed reality games to Vision Pro. So let's think about how we want to approach this as I fumble to find the image for this, unless you want to go first, Ian.
I'll recap some of our previous reporting on this real quick while David looks for that. So we had reporting. So David and I both went, we saw Spectacles, the Snapchat Spectacles, which has a field of view of around 45 degrees. So just a fraction of what you get out of a VR headset. And we both had our own sort of takeaways from that. I saw the way an operating system could branch out from a little pet, a little virtual character that's about yay big. You could have your entire operating system pop out of that. But David, it was so, like, both of us are in agreement here that games are going to be really, really difficult, and they would be completely different than what you can get in a VR headset on AR glasses because of what we saw, that limited field of view.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay. So let's just take the comment directly. You're saying, Meta is showing Orion glasses. Surely Apple is going to throw away Vision and try to build some glasses instead because Meta showed Orion, so it's possible, right? And it's an appealing viewpoint. And in some ways, I wish it was true. But the problem is that Orion is in some ways setting deeply false expectations for real products. So Meta has freely admitted that Orion uses technology to achieve its field of view that cannot be manufactured anytime soon. They're building around 1,000 of them by growing silicon carbide crystals in their basement. There is no production line that would make this viable anytime soon. And so Meta has said that, these things are costing around $10,000 each to build, and they even describe it as a North Star for the future of AR. And Orion is the kind of technology that we might see arrive in the 2030s, but there's still, more than half a decade until we get to the 2030s. And in that time, these pass-through mixed reality headsets, VR headsets, whatever you want to call them, are going to get lighter, cheaper, and significantly better pass-through. The other problem is that by the nature of their form factor, these glasses are going to be significantly less powerful. So that is actually what brings us on to this story. So Meta CTO was asked, is it going to be easy for Quest mixed reality games to be ported to Orion? And he said, no, for multiple reasons. He said it's not impossible, but it's going to be hugely challenging. The first is obvious, right? There's no controllers. So if you build a Quest controller game, that's not good. But of course, there's a lot of Quest mixed reality apps that use hand tracking. So that's not an issue, right? Surely you can just take your hand tracking Quest mixed reality game and port that over quite easily. So firstly, he said there's a limited hand tracking volume. Because these things are glasses, your hand tracking is only going to really work out in the frontal sphere like this, not out to your sides and not down low. As you can see right now, I'm in a Quest 3S and my hand tracking range is actually really, really impressive, right? I can do quite a lot of range of hand tracking that just would not be possible on glasses. But those aren't the main issues, right? You could think of solving them, put some extra cameras on. You could even theoretically add controllers for glasses. The bigger issue is that there is 10 times less computing power in Orion, according to Meta CTO, than a Quest headset. And so part of that is because if you did the compute on board, you would have even less. But what Meta does to get a little bit more compute and keep the glasses light and thin is offload compute to a puck. However, this puck, to be viable as a consumer product, has to fit in your pocket. The idea that Meta has here is they want you to be able to either put this in your pocket or in your backpack and forget it even exists. As long as it's nearby, the glasses work wirelessly. And so if you have to put something in your pocket, then it has to be very thermally limited, because your Quest headset gets a lot hotter than you think it does, but it has these large cooling fans that push the hot air out into the open air in front of you. And if you actually touch the front of your Quest after you've been gaming for 2 or 3 hours, it's really hot. It can actually, be uncomfortable to your hand to touch your headset, but you don't do that, right? You're not going to touch the front of the headset. And a lot of that heat's getting pushed out. You can't do that if it's in someone's pocket. You cannot have a product that overheats your pocket just to work, because this thing has to work for 2 or 3 hours on end, right, before being recharged. So you actually have a more constrained thermal profile, and therefore 10x less computing power. And there was a former Meta employee who posted on X in response to this statement from Meta CTO saying that when they were working with designers for early experiences for Orion, they told them to think more in terms of a Game Boy or Nintendo DS kind of game than a PlayStation, even 2 or 3 or 4. That's the kind of computing power difference we're talking about. So it comes back to what we're saying a lot here on this show, where these are going to be 2 entirely separate categories of devices. Apple will eventually come out with AR glasses, but it won't be a next version of a Vision headset. It will be a separate product line, Apple glasses. And Vision headsets will continue to be sold and improve and get better and better. Just the analogy we often make on this show is the one between your laptop and your phone. There are a lot of tasks you can do on your phone, but if you want to do something that takes serious computing and you want a proper full workspace, you pull out your laptop. You don't use your phone. Your phone didn't replace your PC and your laptop. And in many ways, we'll see the same thing here. The other problem is opacity, right? So even if you have Orion level field of view, which we don't expect to arrive in real glasses until the 2030s, as we said before, the first AR glasses from Meta will have a much narrower field of view than Orion, which will mean that they don't actually deliver that same experience. But even once you do get to those glasses, the ability to have fully opaque and without the other image quality issues of waveguides, it will make headsets more appealing for a lot of tasks. So a long story short here, no, Apple will not completely change its Vision headset plans because of Meta's Orion. You're muted, Ian.
I appreciated Not Suspicious's question here, asking about Airspace Defender. So if you haven't seen Airspace Defender, it's like Missile Command, where you've got like a dome right in front of you and missiles coming in, and you have to pinch to place your missiles to meet the missiles that are incoming. Brilliant little idea. We premiered it earlier this year in our showcase, and we should have another showcase coming up later this year. So if you've got any games out there in development, you can find that form on our website very soon to put in for that. But this question of field of view, and they replied, if the hand tracking refresh rate is good enough and the FOV isn't an issue, with the FOV there being the linchpin of the entire idea, all indications are that what Meta showed was a north star of around 70 degrees field of view, the field of view that they think AR glasses need to be really compelling long term. That doesn't mean that's going to be the field of view of their first consumer or even their first real dev kit that they hand out to devs like yourself. We would expect that field of view to slim considerably compared to what we saw out of the first Orions. So you've got to figure that into your thinking.
Yeah.
And we've got VR headsets that could go out even wider than the current field of view in the time it takes for that to happen.
Yeah, I mean, we've tried 46 degrees in spectacles. I've tried 52 degrees in HoloLens. They're both just not good enough. Go back to last week's show, and you'll hear me discuss spectacles. This field of view just is not good enough. And I can fully believe that 70 degrees is, and as James O'Loughlin's saying, 70 he thinks is good enough for AR glasses. Yeah, the problem is you can't make You can't mass produce AR glasses with that field of view. We're dealing with this problem a lot in the past few weeks and across, not just in the industry, but out in the wider media. Orion is great in many ways of showing it's physically possible to build AR glasses that are good enough. It's possible to build them, right? It's not like something like trying to build a Star Trek transporter or a warp drive. You can build one, but you can't mass produce one anytime soon. So we're dealing with this problem where it's set these deeply unrealistic expectations. And I wonder, like, should Meta have shown off the North Star of headsets too, and shown, this is what a headset will look like in the 2030s? Better
I love that.
understanding. Because a huge flaw here is that people are comparing Orion, which shows you the technology of AR glasses of the 2030s, with Quest 3 and Vision Pro, which is showing you the technology of headsets of 2022 and 2023. And yes, I say 2022 because that's when Vision Pro was originally supposed to come out. It was heavily delayed. You can tell that by the fact that it's using an M2 chip. And, we've seen multiple reports of that. So compare... we feel like a broken record, and I apologize to our viewers who have heard us say this over and over again. But
I'm sure they're frustrated by
the
it
2030s
too, right?
to the headsets of the 2030s, not to today. Sorry, Ian, continue.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. Sorry. I'm sure our audience is frustrated by this ongoing dialogue too, and that's why we kind of need to keep coming back to it, because we're trying to explain this to the masses, even though the masses are saying, "I want the Orions," right? Like, well, there's physics and engineering in between you doing that. And what David just outlined there is Apple, the biggest technology maker on the planet at this point, right? Like the single biggest manufacturer of phones. When you divide up the Android landscape, it's a lot of various companies building out that. And even they had to start at $3,500 in order to build up the manufacturing for its very first device that was delayed by years, as David points out. Like, you've got the company that should be the most skilled in the world at taking an idea from concept to mass market, and they're telling you through the product that they've put on the market that we can't do better than this right now. And like, here we are trying to chart out the next few years of VR headsets where Passthrough gets better, all the things that we've got line of sight to, and all of it is separate to the Orion AR glasses, spectacles line of display tech that needs to ramp up so many years into the future. So like, why don't you look at the devices these companies are actually shipping for your insight into what their next device is? Like, it's not the same thing. And so like, when you see the skepticism that VR headsets will be used for work, I get it. I understand it. But I think we're putting labels to the idea that that's largely a software problem now. That is very, very much a software problem, because it's also weight. It's still one big thing that needs to be fixed. But software still has years to go in improvement to make that more feasible.
Yeah, I do think there are also hardware issues, and that brings us perfectly on to our next story, actually, which is another story from Meta's CTO, where he confirmed, as I said at the start of the show, these two reports that we've talked about from the information. The first report being, and we'll just talk about this very briefly, that Meta cancelled what would have been the 2027 Quest Pro 2. So when I say confirmed, this was in The Verge's Alex Heath's newsletter. This was referring to a conversation he had with Meta CTO Andrew Bosworth at Connect after Heath, tried Orion. And so Bosworth, according to Heath, indicated that this was due to the low performance of the original Quest Pro, as in the market failure of the original Quest Pro. So Meta's thinking, this isn't part of our mission. Our mission is to get headsets from the current tens of millions to hundreds of millions, and releasing another expensive headset is just not part of that for us. Apple will obviously take on that mantle, Samsung and Google likely. And so they're saying, look, we're just not going to come out with this 2027 Quest Pro 2. The idea is that this headset was going to have, 4K micro OLED displays and other high-end stuff like that, while keeping this same kind of design with a rear battery. Likely would have ended up at $1,500, $2,000, maybe even more, that kind of territory. And obviously have face and eye tracking. So that's cancelled. But he also confirmed a separate report, which also came from the information, which is about Meta working on a different headset for 2027, codenamed Puffin. And I've seen a few of our commenters bring up Puffin. And Puffin actually brings us perfectly on from our previous topic, because Puffin is reportedly going to be mixed reality glasses. So according to the report, it is going to be a device that uses pancake lenses and displays, so the same basic display architecture that we have today, but that are very thin and light, such that this headset or glasses, whatever you want to call them, apparently they'll kind of like have a steampunk large glasses look, that achieves a weight of somewhere on the order of 110 grams, which is remarkable given that Orion is 100 grams, right? So this is only going to be a little bit heavier than Orion, and yet be a pass-through system using cameras, displays, and lenses to do the same kind of thing that a Quest 3 is doing today, but on steroids. And to achieve that weight, the core trade-off they're making is to offload compute to a tethered puck. So whereas Vision Pro just offloads battery, this Meta Puffin headset will reportedly do the same for compute as well. Likely not the pass-through processing. They'll probably have a co-processor on board, but the actual kind of app-level compute coming from a puck. So we've talked about this at the time when the report came out. The only new news here is that Meta's CTO has confirmed it's being worked on. It's in the early stages. It could be cancelled. He's not saying this is coming out. He's just saying it is something Meta is working on. And this would kind of deliver on those use cases we're talking about, where you're having your virtual displays, your triple monitor setup, you have your giant cinema screen, but without the issue today, which most people use as an excuse for why, we need AR glasses because VR headsets are big and bulky. Well, they won't be. 3 years' time, if this thing comes out, you're going to have a 110-gram headset that gives you the wide field of view and full per pixel control of opacity, all the way from full pass-through to full VR in something that runs, Horizon OS and isn't limited by waveguides, can actually be mass-produced, and they could probably release this thing at like $1,000, $1,200, something like that. That complete speculation on my part on that last part.
Yeah, so this question from Afro Badger, or this comment, we really want a Quest with face and eye tracking. It is what is missing from me using avatars and Teams calls. I want to go back to this. You kind of got to recognize that what Apple did with Apple Vision Pro is it shipped at least two technologies that were just on the research drawing boards at Meta. They had whole research teams that went and built reverse pass-through, this external display that shows your eyeballs to people that are looking at you. They had whole teams that developed codec avatars, this incredible telepresence technology that will flip a switch in a bunch of brains as to realizing that VR is a killer technology. It's a distance destroyer, right? Apple shipped those in its headset, this $3,500 headset. And then you saw dominoes fall immediately after that, where Meta opened up its OS and said, we're bringing on a whole bunch of partners to basically build the headsets we're not interested in building. So Meta is building $300 headset, $500 headset. And I think there's a very good likelihood the whole of the rest of the technology industry market outside of Apple is waiting to see how those two headsets sell to lock in their plans for the rest of the Horizon OS line to compete against what Apple is doing here. So you got to keep that context in mind, because unless you have that full picture of Apple shipping what Meta had on its drawing boards, you're misunderstanding like this whole Orion thing. But let's move on here, David, to the next one here soon.
I'm just going to wrap this up by saying that you're absolutely right in your outline there. That if Meta is kind of saying now, that's the price point it wants to be at, 300, 500, and if it does do something more expensive, it has to be not just a Quest but with extra features. It has to be a fundamentally different product that offers something that widens the market. And in this case with Puffin, that's being ultralight, right? Being really light to the point where you don't have to hurt your head and face to wear this. So that's obviously the decision they're making. But as you say, they've committed to having third-party headsets run Horizon OS. And I think, I deeply sympathize with this position that people have, that they want an eye tracking and face tracking headset with the latest chipset from Meta. And it looks like that will arrive from either Lenovo or Asus. Presumably, it will be another company that comes along delivering this Horizon OS headset that does this. But there is this dichotomy in the meantime, right? That Meta is on the one hand saying that its most important VR software is Horizon Worlds and the social layer, and the avatars and all of this, and saying that we are a social company. We connect people. The reason we're in VR is to build social presence so that you feel like you're next to someone. And none of our headsets now have eye tracking or face tracking at all, so you can't see other people's facial expressions. There is a massive kind of strangeness in that situation, right? That is a very weird place for Meta to be in. Mark Zuckerberg, before Quest Pro came out, was talking over and over again about how eye tracking and face tracking were his most anticipated features for a new Quest headset. I just think the market response means Meta doesn't, Quest Pro didn't sell. It was a complete flop. It did not sell well at all. But I think that wasn't because of the eye tracking and face tracking. I think Meta drew the complete wrong conclusions from that. They underspec'd it. They had an outdated chipset, terrible pass-through. And there are other issues there with Quest Pro. The resolution, right? It was a monitor replacement that had terrible resolution, right? It did the wrong. They underspec'd a headset and said, "Oh well, a Pro headset can never work." I think that's the conclusion they drew. But you're right to say, Ian. Unless you want to add more, we probably do need to move on here.
Yeah, I think it's such a hard story to get across to our readers. It bears like spending time on. I do want to move on. It's just one of the things we're watching in this industry is when Samsung and Google are going to come forward with what they're planning. So you've got Android, that's the underbelly of Horizon OS, and you've got the prospect raised earlier this year of Meta and Google in talks, but potentially forking those two efforts. And truly, it's not in any of their interests at this point. You can imagine emails going back and forth between all of these companies. You can imagine Meta, Samsung, Google all sending these emails saying, Apple's going to eat our lunch unless we align on this because of the telepresence. And you can imagine a demo, that $1,500 headset, right? That's the price that you all agreed was the killer price. Imagine Apple's avatars, these avatars that are really, really killer on Apple. Imagine those coming from Meta with a more open promise behind them of how you take your identity where you want to go, not attached to maybe some of the things that Apple attaches it to. And imagine Samsung, Google, and Meta all getting together and shipping those kinds of avatars for around $1,500. That's the kind of dream team scenario that I imagine all of those companies are trying to negotiate in real time. And we'll have to see if it happens.
Yeah, I think you're very optimistic there. I'm sure it would be, it would be great to have an open standard there as a Meta's codec avatars working on everything but Apple. I just don't see it happening. Google wants to be the platform layer. Meta wants to be the platform layer. Nobody is going to be the one to jump first, to be the one that says, no, you take the mantle there. One thing I just want to note here is that according to those reports, Puffin, this Ultralight 2027 headset, will have eye tracking, not face tracking, but eye tracking. So at least there, that would be able to have some level of social presence. Do you want to move on to talk about Avalanche?
Yep. We talked about Avalanche a little bit on the Gamescast earlier this week. You can obviously tune into our Gamescast on Tuesdays with Don Hopper as we talk about all the ways people are playing games in VR. We've seen a lot of need in that show for us to recap some of the best classic games to go and get in VR headsets. So I think that's what we're going to do on coming episodes. One way to get those classic games in VR to your headsets today is to stream them from the cloud. And that's what we understand Avalanche to be. David, why don't you break down what this latest news was?
Yeah, we've seen Meta's Avalanche system being tested for years now. It was originally seen in the firmware of Quest V24, I think, which we're now on V71 PTC. So think of how long ago that was. This is something that Meta has been researching, testing. We've even seen multiple times it accidentally, or maybe purposely, who knows, get activated on end users' headsets, right? A random Reddit user a few years ago showed screenshots of Enable Avalanche showing up in their headset settings. A French news outlet, GamerGen, was in the middle of a Quest 3 live stream and went into their settings and saw Enable Avalanche, as we reported a few months ago. And, it came up with a connection error. The original Reddit user said they were able to get through and try Asgard's Wrath 2. So this new news is that this was listed on the store as a Meta app on the Horizon store. It's now been taken down, suggesting it was put up by accident or meant to be private, but it had screenshots of Lone Echo and of Beat Saber and of an Unreal Engine City, a testscape. So, this is Meta is clearly exploring this, right? It's clearly still being worked on. Whether they ever intend to make it a product is a different question, because there are technical issues here, obviously. Doing cloud streaming for even normal gaming is incredibly challenging. To do that for VR is a next level of challenge. But the other bigger problem is the business model, right? How do you do this? Is this part of the Quest Plus subscription service? Do you have to have Quest Plus and buy the Rift games? The one advantage to Meta here is that there would be a bit of recoup on investment, right? Meta spent hundreds of millions of dollars when it was Facebook to fund these AAA PC VR titles for the Rift, right? From Stormland to Lone Echo to the original Asgard's Wrath and others. And they could either spend, another 100 million to port them to Quest 3 and bring down the graphics, right? But many of the teams that worked on these things don't even exist, though. So that's going to take years and years of getting people to get back familiar with this code base. Or they can try to deliver them through cloud streaming. And, in the long term, that is the potential to deliver the PC VR quality of graphics on standalone headsets, which is obviously the holy grail, right? There's huge technical issues, but I do think that's probably the eventual end game. And when I say end game, this could be like, the late 2030s, 2040s, but that you do put on a headset that is thin and light and connects to a cloud GPU in your city that's doing the hard rendering. And I do think that's probably the end game even for Horizon Worlds, because that is, graphics are still one of the key things that hold back standalone VR. And we'll talk later in the show about how with XR2 Gen 2, there was a big leap forward in graphics. And, the graphics no longer suck, but they're still nowhere near what you're getting on your PlayStation 5 and PlayStation 5 Pro, right? And the people are starting to get used to with those kind of consoles. And obviously, it's no, PC gaming. There's still that massive gulf. And so, that is the opportunity here. Deliver that holy grail. PC quality graphics on a standalone headset. The problem is that means that every minute you're playing, Meta is spending money on those GPU costs in the cloud, and it's not clear what the business model here would be.
Yeah, right. We had a token system. We covered it here in the studio. We had the creator of Plutosphere here to talk with our audience about their basically arcade in the cloud was the way they had their model built out for doing exactly what Avalanche is doing. But they hit a roadblock, and the roadblock was Meta telling them that you can't do that. There have been areas of Meta's ecosystem that they've roped off for years, sort of predicting the way these things are going to matter to them long term. Guy Godin, the creator of Virtual Desktop in our audience, is intimately familiar with this overall trend. Maybe he could expand on that in the comments. I don't know. We need to move through this next this meta section. I think you could probably talk about those next two things pretty quickly on your own. Yeah,
I do just want to say that what you pointed is right, though. Meta would face rightful accusations of anti-competitive practices if they came out with this after, as you say, not letting Plutosphere on the store for doing this exact same concept. And there are people in the comments pointing out that they did this already with Plutosphere. We should point out it is possible to do today, even with Virtual Desktop. You can rent a shadow PC in the cloud and use Virtual Desktop to connect to it. Your mileage is obviously going to vary. The biggest factor is going to be, is this in your city, this GPU, or is it off on the other side of the country? Because at those sort of scales, even this minor difference in the speed of light starts to matter, because VR. We'll keep a close eye on this. And earlier, I think 4 years ago now, Meta's Jason Rubin said that the cloud VR was at least 5 years out. So, if you're following that completely random number he probably plucked out of his head in that interview, we're 1 year from the very minimum where this would start to arrive. But yeah, I think we can move on to the next topic, as you say.
Yeah, we've got two more meta subjects here to get into, and then we're going to move on to the keyboard section and then the Quest 3S launch week section. So I think David should probably be able to move through these two stories pretty quickly because they're not the biggest ones, and I think we want to get to that last section pretty quickly. So this first one being the Horizon OS UI set, Meta releasing a UI kit for Unity.
Yeah, Chris Cypher in the comments asking, did I miss the Vive focus discussion? That was very near the start of the show. So yes, you may want to rewatch the show afterwards, or if that's all you've come here for, skip back to the start. I think we're going to cover this one quickly, but it is actually very significant for developers. On any platform you develop for, whether it be phones with iOS and Android, or Windows or Mac, you get a UI framework where you can use the same kind of UI components as the operating system to quickly throw together a UI that is compliant with the rest of the operating system, feels coherent, and that you don't have to reinvent the wheel for. And that's something that has been sorely missing on Quest, which is now called Horizon OS, for a long time. You would have to either roll your own interface if you're building a Quest app, or download something from the Unity asset store, or use like a Unity built-in UI system. And so that is, like I said, something developers have been complaining about. Because say you want to put together a simple app and you want to focus on the immersive aspect of it, you don't want to be thinking about building an interface for it. That is something that would slow down developers. And part of this is just because when you're building for Quest, you have to, until very recently, use a game engine. You can't, there were no native tools until the Meta Spatial SDK, which just came out last week. So the practical advantage here as a developer is that now you want to build an interesting immersive experience, and you don't want to bother with the UI. That's not the fun part. That you don't care about that. You just want a simple UI for settings and browsing between scenes or something like that. You get the latest version of the Meta Interaction SDK and use this Horizon OS UI set for Unity. All of these components are set up to work with the Interaction SDK, which means out of the box, they work with hand tracking and controllers, either indirect or direct. And by that, I mean, you're either directly touching them, or you're at a distance pointing and pinching, just like you do in the home system and, the system menu. So all of this is just handled for developers. This is going to save a lot of people a lot of time in Unity development. I saw when this story came out, I got multiple direct messages from developers saying, thank goodness this is here. I have been wanting this for years. Don't think there's much else to say about this other than you can customize the appearance. By default, they let you really, really easily change the color scheme so you can match it to your app's branding. And then, since this is Unity, if you want, you can go in and change every aspect of this by manually editing things. But for most developers, if you're going to use this, you just change the colors to your brand and move on and focus on the part that really matters, the interesting, immersive experience you're trying to build, not the freaking UI.
Geek Godin saying it's going to make stuff only work on Quest, though. Not really a great strategy to adopt those?
No, that's not correct. It will work on other platforms. It's not pulling these buttons out of the system interface or anything. They're just actually like recreations of Horizon OS inside Unity. And there's also like a Figma kit for this if you want to prototype in Figma. A valid part of that is that your apps are going to look Questy. So if you're building something for Quest and Pico and PlayStation VR 2, maybe people will be like, well, this looks like the Quest interface. Again, if you're a big studio that's building a cross-platform application or game, you're probably going to already have your own UI system. Especially if you're building a game, you're going to want to have something that feels like gamey. That's not really what this is for. This is just someone that wants to build, a solo developer or a small team that just wants to get an app out quick and doesn't want to have to work on the UI system. And like I said, got multiple developers DMing me immediately after this saying, thank goodness this exists now.
Craig's comment, it is crazy that this UI kit has not existed on the platform, and it's taken over 10 years. Two things happened in the last year. Apple shipped its operating system, teaching Meta a lot of lessons that they had arrived at. And the other thing to think about there is that Meta A/B tests almost everything. It's kind of wild to go back in retrospect and miss some of these A/B tests happening right in front of us, right? Rift S versus Quest, right? They're both priced at $400, set up right against each other, with Meta, or Facebook at the time, knowing as they're doing it that the standalone is going to be where they're going to put their focus, even though they kind of needed to perform this A/B test just to conclusively determine what their solution needed to be going forward. Let's talk about this last bit of Meta news here soon.
James O'Loughlin pointing out that Unreal doesn't have this, and saying that this is yet again an example of Meta releasing something for Unity and nothing else. The Interaction SDK itself that this is part of, right? The interaction SDK that lets developers easily make objects grabbable and have interactions like buttons and levers and all these things. It's only for Unity. Unreal's left out, and so far is Godot, right? We talked about Godot over and over again. Meta is pushing it all the time. Well, Meta, if you're listening, if anyone who worked on this and is part of this listening, put your resources where your mouth is, right? Release all of these SDKs for Unreal and Godot. Even the meta avatars that we've talked about, they're only for Unity. You still have this complete failure of a strategic dependency on Unity. And when sure, your core SDKs work on Unreal and Godot, but when it comes down to it, these peripheral frameworks are what developers often need to build truly rich experiences. And if they're not on those other engines, then Unity is going to continue to be the only way to truly build for Quest.
So what about Guy's comment there about the Meta OpenXR SDK, that including that makes it only run on Quest? Is that because Steam checks for it and ejects it? Is that what he's referring to?
No, I think he's referring to like when you're trying to run it on a different standalone headset like Pico or Vive Focus Vision that we just talked about, that the OpenXR loaders on these platforms are slightly different. That's separate to the Interaction SDK, though. The Interaction SDK, you can kind of swap out what core you're using with that. You don't need to strictly use the Meta OpenXR loader. Again, these are just frameworks for Unity, right? These aren't like built into the OS or anything like that.
All right, well, let's move on to this last one. I appreciate David's laughter here at the beginning of introducing this. I do want to encourage you to hit the like button, maybe share this link out to any other people that you might be trying to get on board with the VR bandwagon, so to speak. But yeah, hit that like button to help us algorithmically get this out to more people as we move to the end of the show and really dig into those topics that people are going to really respond to in understanding the future of this medium. So Motorola phones.
Well, last few comments from this have just come in. Nicholas Johansson pointing out that this isn't that framework isn't available for the Metaspatial SDK. So again, it's not even that it's not available for these other engines. It's not even available for Meta's own engine. Ridiculous overdependency on Unity. Free Sky asking, did Meta release this or did Unity? Meta. This is for Unity, but Meta released it. It's why it looks like Meta's Horizon OS. But yes, as Ian says, let's talk about this next topic. If you have a Motorola phone, this is for you. If you don't, this isn't for you. The news here is quite simple, that you'll be able to see and use your Motorola phone in VR in Horizon OS on Quest and on future Horizon OS headsets. If you're not aware, Motorola is owned by Lenovo, and Meta and Lenovo have partnered to build Horizon OS headsets that Lenovo will put out there running Meta's OS. So at Lenovo's yearly tech conference, Mark Zuckerberg appeared on stage, not literally, but through a video link, to say that Lenovo is still working on headsets plural using Horizon OS. So we should see probably next year, presumably, these Lenovo Horizon OS headsets. But they also have this other software partnership for the Motorola subsidiary of Lenovo, where you'll be able to see and use your phone in VR. It's really quite simple. There'll be an app on the Horizon Store. You open that wirelessly, your phone appears on a giant screen as a panel that you can place anywhere you want. And not only viewing, but interacting with. So you actually can kind of click on the touch screen. A lot of reactions to this are, what, Motorola still makes phones? But yeah, I mean, Motorola actually has a 5% global market share and 10% in the US. So if you're one of those people, congratulations. If you're not.
Subcog in our comments. I think they left the comment on our article as the lone Motorola user out there. Just basically signing in our audience and saying, it's me. I'm the one excited about this. I appreciate you. I think we'll keep you in our hearts and minds going into the future because we know it matters to you.
Yeah, so people obviously are going to ask, why is this only for Motorola? Why, what are you doing, Meta? Why isn't this for Samsung and Pixel? Well, the answer is because Motorola are making it, right? This isn't like Meta making this. I am sure if Samsung wanted to make the same, Meta would say, come on, absolutely do this. Well, here's $50 million, or, I'm not kidding about that part. But, with a lot of these things, the organization that is the mover here is actually the provider. So people have asked, why don't we have a Netflix app on Quest with downloads? And I've complained about that for years. But realistically, that's not actually in Meta's court. That's in Netflix's court. The same thing with Google Play Store, right? People have asked, Meta, why don't you bring the Google Play Store to Quest? And Andrew Bosworth, the CTO of Meta, has said over and over again, what do you mean me? Go ask Google. Same thing with Discord. He said this about Discord and Spotify. People are like, I want Discord on Quest. And he's like, well, go ask Discord if they want to do it. Well, of course we'll do it. Well, yeah, great. Not our decision. So that is the thing, right? Motorola wants to do this. That's why it's here. The other phone makers don't see an interest yet. And I'm sure Samsung obviously is literally working on a competitor to Quest headsets and Vision Pro with Google. So Google is not going to want to do it because they're building up their own competing platform, Android XR. Samsung is building the first headset for that competing platform. So you're not going to see cooperation there for any time soon, I don't think.
Yeah, really, really key point here. I like David's sort of breakdown of the pressures here playing out. I would throw back examples like Pluto Sphere and Big Screen out into the ether again and again and again as issues where Meta does have an opinion there on whether those platforms can do what they want to do on their system. As the exceptions to what David said. Any comments you want to respond to there before we move to the last two big sections of the show? And I did see our views go up a little bit, so I think that was probably due to some likes. So please keep hitting that like button. So thank you.
I think a big question here is whether this will support DRM content. Ian is obviously very interested in Meta Quest HDMI link, which you can already with pretty much any phone. See it inside Horizon OS, not control it, but see it. And so the problem with that is A, use a cable, B, it doesn't support DRM content. Will this support DRM? Will I be able to have my downloaded Netflix movies on my Motorola phone and then wirelessly cast it onto my Quest headset? Who knows? We'll have to see. We'll ask Subcog when it comes out. Subcog, please let us know as soon as you get this, whether or not that works. We should also point out that Vision OS, since Vision OS 2, lets you see your iPhone as a giant screen in VR, but it doesn't let you control. So this is unique as far as I'm aware, and that this will actually let you control your phone inside VR, but again, only for Motorola phones.
Yeah, very big deal there to a showpiece space for Meta to kind of prove out some concepts, right? The idea that you talked about earlier, just putting the puck in your bag and forgetting about it. Maybe you could do that with your phone. If this really worked really well, you just put your phone onto a battery pack and then throw it in your bag and forget about it, and boom, you've got everything in your headset. Well, as David's pointing out, I've been doing that essentially with my iPhone and the Quest, and because I can't operate the phone that way, there's a large amount of friction.
So Craig Melville in the comments said that the Google's Play Store may come to Quest with the latest court outcomes. And we have been following that. I do like to keep up to date with all of the tech news, including these kind of regulatory and legal issues. For my understanding, that's actually the opposite. That's saying that if you are a company like Google, you have to let other stores onto your platform. It's not saying that any store has to be on every other platform, right? It's actually the opposite. So in this case, if Meta were large enough, if Quest was a large enough platform to be impacted by this, the idea would be, based on that ruling, if it was more widely applied, disclaimer, that Meta would have to let someone else's store on Quest as well as the Horizon store. It's not saying that Meta magically gets to force Google to bring the Play Store to Horizon OS. So it's actually the opposite is what's the case there. And it was obviously only in the case of phones. They're talking about these massive platform level decisions. These regulatory and court things have like a scale cutoff. For example, with the EU's regulation, I think like they're who is a gatekeeper has to be like over 500 million users, or maybe 100, 200 million. The number doesn't matter. The point is, past a threshold, these regulations apply, and then below that threshold, they leave you alone.
But of course, these companies are planning to be that size. They have to have their platforms ready for when they cross that threshold. So let's move on to this keyboards real and virtual section, because it is starting to talk about the future, some of the really big ideas that can unlock some of these things. over the long term. I've been playing with the Tap XR band. It's this little band that you can find on Amazon. Put it on your wrist, and it makes a keyboard out of your finger movements. So you've got a different combination of finger movements that tap onto a table. And this Tap XR band translates that into a letter on a keyboard. And I've been trying to learn how to use it before properly reviewing it or writing about it. And there is the learning curve of having to learn how to do this new input system before I get into that. But it's very, very interesting. And we're seeing a lot of innovation in this area. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about here is these new ideas. So why don't you break this down for us, David?
Yeah, two keyboard stories. It's interesting how sometimes you do get like these collection of stories, right? Like one week we'll have two drone stories, the next week we'll have like two keyboard stories. It's like when Hollywood releases two similar movies in the same year. I'm sure the commenters can think of good examples when it's like two studios bring out pretty much the same concept of movie. Anyway, so typing in a VR headset, mixed reality headset, whatever you want to call them, sucks by default. You have this floating virtual keyboard, whether it be on Horizon OS or Pico or Vision OS. You're kind of like poking with your fingers, and any minor inaccuracies in hand tracking, as well as just the fact that you're doing something in midair with no haptics whatsoever, means that you're going to get like inaccuracy there. Everyone agrees that, right? So for serious text input on a Quest headset, you can pair a Bluetooth keyboard just as you can on Pico and Vision OS as well. And for quite a long time now, Quest has had this feature that used to be called tracked keyboards, where for certain models of keyboards, for example, like some of the popular Logitech keyboards and the Apple Magic Keyboard, it will track the keyboard in 3D space, and then Meta has a pre-made 3D model that they show in VR at the exact same position so that you can have your keyboard there with you in VR. Now, that's great, and I really like that feature, but there are two problems with it. The first problem is that it's a losing battle to catalog and 3D model every keyboard ever made. And if you don't have one of those keyboards, you're out of luck, right? Because Meta hasn't made a 3D model of it. The other problem there is that the keyboard has to be connected to the headset so that it knows to look for it in the first place. So with V71 PTC, public test channel build of Horizon OS, Meta has added a different feature that is arguably more janky, but universal. It works with any keyboard, whether it's connected to your headset or not. The headset looks for a nearby keyboard looking thing and then does a pass-through cutout. So you're not seeing a virtual model of your keyboard. You're literally just seeing pass-through cutout into a rectangle in the position of where the keyboard is. And so you see here, this is my keyboard, my fingers, and then outside of that, everything is VR. This is a virtual reality home environment. So like I said, it's a little bit janky where, the cutout isn't perfect. You're going to see a little bit of stuff that isn't your keyboard, but it's a nice universal solution. And the good part about it working when it's not connected to your PC is that means, or not connected to your headset, is that means you can use it with your PC, right? So if you're connecting with virtual desktop or Horizon Workrooms or remote desktop or Immersed or any of these solutions, you can then just keep the keyboard still connected to your PC, use your peripherals as normal, and your headset's just doing this display part. It's not managing the input through the headset. So yeah, D. Godin is pointing out that it is actually exactly how Virtual Desktop implemented it. And we, well, not exactly, but it's very similar to how Virtual Desktop implemented. Virtual Desktop, in a recent update, used the old tracked keyboard behavior to take the position of where the 3D model would have been and do a pass-through cutout. But that obviously only would have worked with the supported tracked keyboards. But yeah, this is obviously a more universal solution. I still prefer the original implementation for what it's worth. I still prefer having like a 3D model of my keyboard in VR, but I understand that it is not practical for Meta to try and 3D model every keyboard in existence.
Yeah, Guy Godin responding to commenters there saying that they're working on pass-through portals that you can customize and adjust for various things in your environment, and that is a killer feature to me. The question specifically being asked to put a portal over on your pet so you can watch your pet in VR without leaving full VR, right? You just have a small little sliver of mixed reality over there where your dog is and where your keyboard is, and you're good to go. So let's talk about this next subject, because I think this one is firing people up about the the tactile nature of physical keyboards that they love, and the idea of that going away is not an easy thing to consider. So what is this research, David?
Sure. So, I mean, I'll start by saying that if you don't have a physical keyboard, or you're taking your Quest on the go and you just want to enter in text input on your device, you're stuck with this floating keyboard, right? So we're not talking about, with this next story, replacing your physical keyboard necessarily. In many ways, this is talking about being a better solution for these floating keyboards, this being Vision OSs, this being Horizon OSs. They suck, right? Everyone knows that they suck. So this research is called Touch Insight. And they claim that they have come up with a neural network that can basically, with just the hand tracking on a Quest, no markers, no external devices, turn any flat surface into a keyboard with a great degree of speed and accuracy. So let's talk numbers here. The floating keyboard of Horizon OS, according to the research they did, where they did user studies on this floating keyboard allows for an average of about 20 words per minute with an uncorrected error rate of 8%. Now, they claim that with Touch Insight, you get an average of 37 words per minute and an uncorrected error rate of 2.9%. So it's more than twice as accurate and almost twice as fast without having any external hardware. So the example here could be you get on a plane or a train and you fold down your tray table in front of you and you see a keyboard there, and you've just turned the tray table in front of you into a virtual keyboard without having to carry anything else. And this would be applicable in the long term to AR glasses as well, right? That would be something that you could then use with them. So you literally only have these glasses that eventually are going to, fit in like a jacket pocket. You pull them out, and now you have a workstation, a more portable workstation than any technology ever before. Literally like having, a triple monitor setup and a keyboard that fits in your pocket. That's the end goal here. The question I imagine people are going to ask is, how does this compare to typing on a smartphone? The statistics for that, according to their research, were 36 words per minute on average with a 2.3% error rate. So Touch Insight, this technology, this neural network-based hand tracking processing technology, is pretty much as fast as a smartphone and slightly less accurate. And that's on a table, and this is only with today's research. And Meta actually showed off research that was similar to this last year. You may remember. This is Andrew Bosworth, the CTO of Meta, where they said that they actually got to 120 words per minute peak. But this system was using QR code markers that were, fluential markers where there seemed to be some sort of tracking assisting going on here. And this was seemingly connected to a PC as well. The remarkable thing about this new Touch Insight, all running on the Quest 3, no external hardware, no external markers. You can see this isn't even a detailed table that's easy for tracking. The idea is that this just works.
Yeah, so this is without any bracelets. This is computer vision. So to answer Creative Experiment's question there. And the question I have in my mind for this is, what happens when you add those in combination with it? Because this is going to face a really difficult issue where like a cut both ways type situation. Touch typists, right? The people who know how to type without actually looking at their keyboards have a superpower that everyone else who needs to look at their keyboards do not have. Well, I'm wondering how this is going to force people to have to look down at their fingers in order to make sure the headset doesn't lose all that accuracy that's inherent to the system. So like if I'm looking up at a movie up here for a few minutes because it's distracting me, does that have any kind of an effect on the accuracy of the system? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe they got that figured out. But that's one of the things I'll be wondering about. And then if you add the bracelets on top, do you get to 120 and beyond with typing?
Yeah, those are interesting questions, especially if we talk about Meta's EMG wristband that they showed off with Orion. If you add that, do you start to get to the level of precision? You can do that at the same level of precision as the keyboard. The thing you're obviously still always going to miss with this solution is touch typing, right? You can't feel the keys because there are no keys there. You would probably have to look quite often until you get this like muscle memory. The interesting thing is that when you get this level of precision with the wristband, Meta's talked about that even when you're nowhere near the keys, they can kind of actually figure out what your intention was and do this kind of spooky combination of neural networks and tracking to figure out user intent. And they've shown off research of this. Like when we saw the research version of this years ago, they were showing a typing demo where you're wearing one on each wrist. And even in midair, you go like that. So there is a lot of work to be done here. It's clearly an area of active research. There's optimism to be had here. It does look like the problem of text entry in VR can have traction towards it, and we haven't seen traction towards it for years. Daniel Leeper is pointing out a big problem that would you really want to put your fingers on a tray table all the time, on a train, especially in the UK? You're right, I probably wouldn't. But you could imagine having like a little rollable mat, right? Like think of an exercise mat, but miniaturized like 100x so that it fits in your pocket, it rolls out, and you just have this like literal mat. You could even have like little sort of what's the word I'm looking for, like cutouts for the keys, right? Where this is a completely non-electronic device. It's a $10 piece of fabric. It rolls out, and then you're touching the keys, but this device isn't figuring that out. Your headset or your wristband or a combination of the two is figuring out which key you're touching. There are so many potential solutions here. I think this is something that in the 2030s, this is going to be a solved problem.
Yeah, very interesting way of thinking about that there. It's kind of wild because I was talking, was it Ben Lang over at Road to VR about this, because this is not like super portable keyboards are not a new idea. They rolled out in numbers 15 years ago, right? When they tried to figure out keyboards for mobile phones that you could slip into every crevice. And I've got one that's a folding super slim keyboard that sits in any bag. Like I can slip it into almost any pocket, including my own pocket, fold it out, and boom, I've got that keyboard ready to go. Well, VR is actually the medium, I think, to help some of these ideas really take off that just weren't right for mobile phones. Like no one is going to write their new novel on an iPhone screen that's this big. Or code necessarily on a window that only shows you 6 lines of code at a time. VR is where you could see thousands of lines of code spreading out in front of you, and then you've got the use of all these things. We're ready to move on to this last section here. I want to hit one more time to ask you to hit that like button. I saw us go over 200 on this stream a little bit, and I think I'd love to see those numbers go up again as we get into the Quest 3S section of this show, because that is what so many people are waiting for.
Yeah, an interesting discussion in the comments about speech to text. If you watch Star Trek, they don't use keyboards; they just captain's log. They read it out loud, and the computer perfectly transcribes it. I think we're very much so either there or near there for perfect speech transcription. If you combine like the state of the art with a large language model that can pretty much figure out exactly what you're trying to say. But as the commenters are pointing out, that doesn't work in public. There's also like if you're coding or you're doing stuff with like punctuation or you're making a table, there are many text input paradigms that just can't work with voice, or at least not practically. The other problem is in public, it just breaks down, right? You're not going to want to write your private message to your wife while you're on by speaking it out loud on a bus or a plane or a train, right? You want privacy, and in many ways, as you often point out, Ian, VR, mixed reality, whatever you want to call them, headsets actually give you more privacy than ever before, because not only are you typing on a keyboard that not only are you typing in a keyboard instead of speaking out loud, but your screen of your actual output is completely private to you. No one else can see what you're viewing in a headset.
One last thought on this subject, since everyone is going into Star Trek and bringing up my favorite mental model for VR in the future, right? Where I've brought it up many times, but Geordi LaForge, the engineer on the ship who is blind, is able to see better than everyone. That's where we're moving towards with VR headsets, and especially when we've seen multiple commenters bring it up over the course of the show, the idea that what if you put crazy amounts of computer vision on top of what you can see with just the naked eye, and that's you get Geordi LaForge's visor from that. But the idea that I wanted to add to this is Star Trek. If you go watch that, one of my favorite things that they do is when they talk to the computer, they give instructions that are extremely complex verbally to the computer. And I want to point out that we don't think like that. Humans do not think like that. They don't know how to talk to a computer with those complex instructions. We have been trained over the last 30 years to put 3 keywords into a Google search engine. And that's how we interact with computers. That's how we find information. Typing out full words, full sentences, full paragraphs is a different way of thinking. And this whole idea of just how do we go full circle where kids can critically think with words to a computer. It's a very big idea, something we're going to think about very long term here, but it's there's no like silver bullet solution to have 6 generations of humans who have lived through 3 different eras of personal computer technology all to input the exact same way and feel the same level of expression that they did on the previous generation. It's going to be an amalgamation of solutions for the foreseeable future here. All right, Quest 3S. We ready to talk about that headset on your head, David?
Yeah, I think we are. I mean, this is a headset that we have talked about a lot on this show. We talked about it almost every week before it was announced, and even back when we thought it might be called Quest 3 Lite, when we were still saying, is it going to be called 3S or 3 Lite? So if you're a long-time viewer of the show, you're not going to be surprised about what this headset is. It is, well, depending on how you want to look at it, a Quest 2 with Quest 3's chip and sensor suite capabilities for mixed reality and controllers, or it's a Quest 3 with Quest 2's lenses and display. There are a couple of more subtle differences, though, and I think that's what we'll start by discussing. And one is the article we put out. So just for some context here, we aren't able to have a review on launch day or today because we actually only got our Quest 3S on Monday, which is a shorter turnaround than we've ever had before. And that means that we simply can't bring you a review, but we will cover most of what we're going to have in the review today, at least. We did put out an article of one of the most important findings we had in our initial testing, one of which is, as we alluded to at the start, that this thing has better low light head and hand tracking than Quest 3. And this is an image we took. This is my Quest 3S review unit showing you that you can actually see red dots on the front. And what these red dots are infrared illuminators. So here and here you have the pass-through cameras, these color cameras that you see the real world with, and below them tracking cameras, the cameras that are used for head tracking, controller tracking, hand tracking, environment meshing, and all of that, as well as obviously there are other tracking cameras on the side. But these new circles that join the other circles are not cameras at all or sensors of any kind. They are the opposite. They are illuminators. They are IR lights, IR floodlights that mean that even in darkness, your hands and nearby objects like walls and other geometry are bathed in infrared light. And these tracking cameras here can see in infrared. And that's how they track the controllers, right? The controllers have infrared LEDs under the plastic. As well as that, obviously, they can now see a illuminated view of your hands. So in practice, what does this mean? Firstly, it means that headset tracking works in the dark if you are near geometry. I had an interesting discussion with some US journalists that had Quest 3S for a week or so, who said, I didn't find this in my initial testing. And we talked about it and realized, well, you can look this up, but US homes are generally a lot larger than European homes. And so you might be in the middle of a room where your nearest wall is quite far away. And in that case, this can't track in the dark because it's just illuminating nothing. But if you're in a smaller environment where these illuminators are illuminating a nearby wall or your bookcase or your shelf or whatever, then that headset is seeing that even in pitch black. And so it can do head tracking based on what it's seeing. So I find that in my UK apartment, which by American standards is probably very small, I can walk around my whole apartment in complete pitch darkness and still have this thing track my head. Interesting on its own. But where it really gets interesting is that regardless of your room size, it'll track your hands because your hands are only ever going to be within, arm's length by definition. And that's well within range of the IR illuminators. So you no longer have to worry about hand tracking stopping working because it gets too dark in your room. You can theoretically just use this thing in bed and play hand tracking games. And the hand tracking quality seems to be pretty much the same in the dark as it is in the light, which is quite remarkable considering that for years now on Quest, we've been saying, our top tip, if you want to play this hand tracking game or this, gotta make sure your light's on and it's not coming in the wrong direction and you got the right kind of light, and make sure you're in a well lit room. It's just no longer really an issue with this headset. It's a fascinating addition, and it's something I am almost certain. In fact, I would place a bet, not literally, but that it will be in Quest 4 as well, because this just changes the input modality of this headset and takes that environmental factor completely out.
Yeah. Was that covering the last was that covering the last story on our subject, or are we going to do that separate here? Because I wanted to make sure we talk about that a little bit. I think it was Mr. Mycelium previous on a show. Maybe it's a different commenter, but talking about this idea about kids, teenagers able to privately view their VR headset in the dark. I take myself back to being a kid, and I had a family. I think an uncle went and got me a little itty bitty TV. So I got my first TV when I was very young for my own bedroom, little TV about this big sitting on the other side of the room. And I remember it keeping me up. I remember staying up past QVC playing at midnight up until Star Trek premiered around midnight, and I could watch Star Trek from about 12 to 1 a.m. as I'm slowly falling asleep, and my parents having to go and put the security lock on the TV to lock me out somehow from being able to do that and getting in trouble. That's the place that this device fills in some homes for some people, and it's a really interesting thing to think about the potential there.
I guess another analogy was before Game Boys had their backlights, and they would have them under the bed and try to have kind of a little bit of moonlight to illuminate the screen because your parents wouldn't allow you to have the light on. It's a very similar thing. I just want to reply to some comments asking about the difference between this and Quest 3 in terms of these illuminators. So some people asking, doesn't Quest 3 have IR illuminators? So not quite. Quest 3 actually has a single depth projector in the middle, and there's so much misconception. This is probably one of the biggest misconceptions about the Quest headset hardware that there is. Some people think that this is a depth sensor in the same sense as a LiDAR, where it sends out light and then measures the change in reflectivity. It's not really. What this is, it is an IR emitter, but it actually is a line emitter. So it emits a series of flashing infrared lines. And what that's used for is only during mixed reality room setup, so that the headset can tell the shape of a kind of Spartan environment. So if you just have blank white walls and with not much detail around, the headset can kind of have some trouble sometimes seeing, is that flat or is that a curve at that part of the wall? So with Quest 3, by projecting those lines, it can then look at how those lines bend based on the geometry, right? If you're pointing it towards a corner of the room where the wall is cornered, then that's going to kind of curve as if you project a line, what it's going to look like on curved geometry. So that's what this helps for. And in practice, what this means, and I'll talk about this more in my proper review, is that Quest 3S it takes slightly longer to scan your room for mixed reality, right? That's the real only disadvantage of this thing, because this is not really a depth sensor. That's not how your Quest headset is actually figuring out the depth of your room to do this room meshing or to do dynamic occlusion. That's actually happening on these tracking cameras. They're comparing the view between these two cameras, which both of these headsets have, right? These tracking cameras in the front, and then using a computer vision algorithm that leverages the state of the art to figure out depth from disparity is what they call it, right? The stereo disparity, figure out depth. So this was only ever an assisting, right? You can actually cover this on your Quest 3 and it will do everything it does just as well, except it'll, in the same way as Quest 3S, be a little bit slower and worse at figuring out your scene mesh setup. So they just, I think when they originally were building Quest 3, they probably thought maybe this would be needed. And software and computer vision got so good that it's not really necessary anymore, right? Do you really care that it takes 5 seconds more to scan your room? Probably not. I don't think we'll see. If Meta was rebuilding Quest 3 today, they would have the same hardware as Quest 3S. They would have these illuminators, which are more useful because they help in the dark. So theoretically, people have wondered, could they just flash this thing constantly when you're doing hand tracking in the dark? We don't know why they don't do that. It could be that it's just not bright enough, right? This isn't meant to illuminate things. It's just meant to do lines. It could be that it's too power hungry. Maybe this thing has a higher power consumption because it's doing the specific line patterns. We don't know, but it's a strange scenario to be in the Quest 3 S has better hand tracking, but it's a year later, right? It's a newer headset. And the other thing you can see on here is that they also added a flicker sensor. That really only matters if you're, for some reason, in an environment where the lights are flickering at a different rate than what your country suggests. So like in Europe, it's 50 hertz lighting. In America, it's 60 hertz. Quest will just set that by your location. You can also manually set it, but I guess if you've ever been in Quest 3 Passthrough and you've got like these weird LED lights, they're refreshing at the wrong rate, and so you see them like flickering and flashing, that shouldn't be an issue on Quest 3S anymore.
So, Subcog's comment here, the biggest problem is that you lose pass-through video in the dark. Meta should really switch to the black and white cameras for pass-through in darkness. Do you remember Silence of the Lambs? Do you remember the scene near the end of Silence of the Lambs? That's what you're talking about, giving people the ability to do with their Quest headsets when other people in the room can't see with their actual eyeballs. And I think that's a PR disaster to think about that rolling out broadly without some kind of system built around it. Like that's one of these things, supervision. That's one of the ideas that, what if you could look down the street and have an auto zoom feature bring the things that are far away closer to you? It's one of the things that VR headsets with computer vision can do. One of the long-term ideas, let's watch what happens with the IVAS program at the U.S. Army. That was an AR system that I think there's opportunity for VR to be used for that. But going back to this crazy this current subject, I wanted to talk about Guy Godin's comment on the lenses. Did you see his comment about?
Sure. Yeah. Let's move on to talk about the headset more. We'll just finish off on this topic about the sensor differences and then move on to talk about that. We've done this in a weird order, but we thought, why not talk about the big difference between Quest 3, and then we'll talk about what's the difference in terms of like all the other things into Quest 2. Just one last question from Nicholas Johansson. I'm not sure if you asked this while I was still explaining, but you're asking, is the depth projector not also used for the depth API? No. All of that depth estimation that's used for pass-through, that's used for dynamic occlusion, all of that is done in software by these, just using these stereo black and white cameras in the front. So yeah, I think we'll move on now to talk about like Quest 3S in its more general sense. Like you say, the lenses, the compute, what is this headset really?
Yeah, so let's talk in particular about those lenses. I think that's where we got to begin here, because I think that's the thing you lose when you go $300 instead of $500. You go to lenses, as Guy Godin suggested here in the comments, from 2018. So you're talking about ancient lens technology. You're talking about the last millimeter, so to speak, before your eyes, and all those photons need to go through much older technology to your eyes on this headset.
Yeah, so I mean, that is the biggest difference between this and Quest 3, really. The hand tracking things are minor. Most people aren't going to be playing in low light all the time anyway. The vast majority of usage I would expect in gaming is going to be controllers anyway, where none of that applies. The biggest difference between this and a Quest 3 is those lenses. It is using the exact same lenses as Quest 2, which, as Guy Godin points out, are the same lenses that were used in Quest 1, Rift S, and Go. The one thing I would say about that is, though, that Go's lenses were very far ahead of their time, and we praised at the time like that these are the best lenses in VR. They were at the time, and they were only really beaten by Pico 4, which is 2 years ago, and then obviously by Quest Pro and Quest 3 completely blown out of the water. So yeah, I think people conflate two things when it comes to the Quest 2 and Quest 3S lenses, though. One is them just being Fresnel lenses. And that isn't, like, it's worse than Pancake, but they're not bad lenses, right? This idea that they're bad is not, like, I'm wearing it right now and I can see my tablet clearly. Like, if I rotate my eyes up to the corner, sure, things get a little blurry, but it's better than some people make it out. People talk about, like, these things are like, lenses that make everything look blurry and terrible. They're not, unless, let me finish. Yeah. Let me get to point two. Unless your IPD doesn't fall within one of those three settings. It's not really the lenses that are the big problem. It's the lens separation adjustment system. Because on a Quest 3, you have a knob to precisely align the lenses with your eyes, right? Down to like the sub-millimeter level. You set those lenses exactly where you want. just as you could on Quest 1 with these lenses, right? Quest 1 let you precisely align these exact lenses. But with Quest 2, to save cost, to get that $100 cheaper price while increasing the computing power by double, they made the decision to go with a single panel with these lenses that are set up to be moved into one of three positions. I would still contend, if you're one of the people, if your IPD falls within plus and minus 1 millimeter of these three positions, this is actually going to be a good optical experience for you. It's not pancake lens level, but it's not bad at all. The problem is that if you are, for example, slap bang in the middle of 1 and 2 or slap bang in the middle of 1 and 3, that's when these lenses are bad. They are actually bad at that point. Not because of the lenses themselves, but because of the adjustment system, because they're stuck to three positions. Sorry, Ian, please continue with what you're going to say.
Oh, no, I was going to say, like, this overall concept of going backwards in tech. I think people don't expect a new product to make a sacrifice like this to show you.
Well, the iPhone SE does the same thing, right? It's backwards from Quest 3, but it's equal from Quest 2.
Okay, but I need to put into that the idea that you're simulating a sense. That's where the comparison falls flat when you talk about an iPhone SE that maybe gives you 60 frames a second versus 120 frames per second or whatever it is. That's not taking over an entire sense. And when you think about Apple inserting the word vision into their product line, and now HTC right there as well, throwing vision into their product line, these are products that are embracing the idea that you are augmenting an entire sense of your body. And it's not one-to-one what you get out of your actual eyes, right? You're making various sacrifices, one of them being fixed focus, another one being resolution. Those are things that you get when you take the headset off and you get full resolution of the world. You get full varifocal distances where your eyes focus naturally on everything you look at very, very quickly. Going backwards in any way on a whole sense feels wrong to a lot of people out there.
But again, you're only going backwards from the $200 more expensive product. Nobody is going to have a Quest 3 and then sell it and get a Quest 3S, right? That would be going backwards. Keep in mind, the majority of people who buy this will probably be their first ever headset. So they've never seen a pancake lens headset, or maybe they saw it in Vision Pro demo, but they don't care about what's $3,500. The other people that buy this will be coming from a Quest 2, right? People who want to upgrade to get mixed reality, or people who, more realistically, people who want to upgrade to get twice the GPU power, which means that you get better graphics and you play games like Batman that you can't even play on Quest 2. And for those people, the optical experience is going to be the same, except you're now seeing things in higher resolution, because this renders at the same resolution as Quest 3. That's something that we need to make really important here. From an application and developer perspective, this is a Quest 3. If you run an app on this, it's running at the exact same resolution and refresh rate and graphics than what you see in the Quest 3, right? You go back to back, it's the same experience, just seen through Fresnel lenses. And again, I do think that like Meta's Fresnels are the best Fresnels, right? Like maybe you could argue that in some aspects, PlayStation VR2s are better if they're perfectly aligned. The problem is their iBox is pretty terrible, right? So if you can get PlayStation VR2s perfectly aligned, and that means that you're getting your comfort and your lens perfect, maybe it's a bit better. But like when it comes to all of the aspects together, iBox, clarity, I would say overall these are the best Fresnels. I don't think anyone else has better Fresnels, but they are still Fresnels. But I do think this is like, think of all the people that got a Go or a Rift S or a Quest or a Quest 2. Did we ever say to them, like, these are bad lenses? Was this ever part of our review of, oh no, the Quest 2, it's great, but the lenses are bad? No, we only knew what we were missing when we saw pancake lenses. And if you've never seen those pancake lenses, again, with the massive caveat of if your eyes happen to have the IPD that is within one of these three settings, I don't think people are going to care.
Geek Odin with some very strong predictions there for the potential market for this headset. And I think that's going to my hints or my suggestions here, that I think this whole ecosystem of Google, Samsung, all the partners that Meta is trying to bring into the Horizon OS system, I think they're going to be watching at the sales numbers with great intent. Just laser focused on exactly how many units this thing moves, compared to the Quest 2 a few years ago. And so Guy in our comments here thinking that Quest 2's sales numbers were a blip on the radar due to COVID, that they sold that many, that the trajectory this thing might be on might be the same as the Quest 2, not a whole bigger market as Meta has sort of been hoping for. Of course, they do have two headsets on the market, right? Both running the XR2 Gen 2, so it should be a very big year for Quest 3 as well. So overall, they might still achieve more market share than the last generation of their system. But the question becomes, who else jumps on this bandwagon with Meta and actually follows through on shipping their systems if it's that hard of a sell for them to ship these things in greater numbers? Like, who wants to go ship 500,000 headsets that cost $1,000 for the Meta ecosystem? That's not a good market for someone to pop in here for.
Yeah, so I mean, we don't know yet. The only indication we have so far is that Quest 3S is currently, and has been for 48 hours now, I checked before we came on the show, the highest selling device in the video games category of Amazon. So that's a good leading indication there, that this thing is outselling, the other consoles. And number 3 is actually Quest 3, and number 2 is PS5 Pro, obviously, the new console coming out very soon that people are pre-ordering. So sure, there is the argument there that you brought up the argument to the opposite of saying, sure, Quest 2 was just a pandemic blip. There's not enough reason to upgrade, and so then this thing won't sell as much. That's that side of the argument. Let's bring up the other side. The other side is that one of the biggest things constraining Quest 2 sales was the graphics. That with Quest 1, the graphics just very badly sucked in anything realistic, right? It's fine if you're doing Super Hot or Beat Saber, but if you're trying to do the kind of like rich, immersive RPGs and shooters that people care about, like the graphics just sucked, okay? That's the reality. With Quest 2, I think they doubled the GPU power there, and they got to the point where it's like, these graphics are kind of okay, right? They're maybe passable, but in a lot of cases, when developers were either inexperienced with mobile or they're trying to do too much, they really just still sucked, okay? So the best of Quest 2 was okay, and then the worst sucked. And I think with the XR2 Gen 2, we're now passing a threshold for standalone VR where the graphics don't suck anymore. And that's a huge deal. That means that from a headset, can stand alone without needing a PC or a console, you can start to deliver the kind of games that people are, wider gamers are interested in, that give like a deeply immersive, rich graphical experience. It's still not great, right? It's still not like, doesn't look like PC, it doesn't look like PlayStation VR 2, but you do get to this point where I think it does pass an acceptability threshold. And if you want to get good examples of this, go on to UploadVR.com and look at how in the past week we've shown footage of Skydance's Behemoth running standalone on Quest 3 and Metro Awakening running standalone on Quest 3. And have a look at on other social media platforms and on YouTube what the comments under these videos say. They go, like, a lot of, you even get PC VR users going, wow, like I've always looked at standalone and laughed, but now this doesn't suck anymore. Like, these are actually good graphics. And so if you then combine this with big IPs, right? You have Metro, you have Alien, you have Batman, you start to get a system that is actually much more compelling for Quest's core use case than Quest 2. And as we see other developers more widely leaving behind the XR2 Gen 1, because now Gen 2 is available at $300 and is being proliferated, I do think that is meaningful. The other thing is pass-through, right? It is, for a lot of people, we've seen Meta say that they find that a lot of people spend time in Quest 3's pass-through. And it's, even if you aren't interested in mixed reality, which I think if you've tried some of the newer, better stuff, you may start to be, right? We've got Laser Dance, was just delayed, but is coming out next year. Starship Home,
Pencil.
Defender.
I think Pencil is the one that's my Pencil is standout. You can learn to draw in minutes.
Sure.
You've been a non-artist your entire life. You will learn to draw in minutes using mixed reality with Pencil.
Even if you don't care about that, the quality of life improvement of, while you're waiting for your games to update or you're kind of waiting to join in a party with someone, having your surroundings and awareness of your physical surroundings around you is something that's meaningful. And one of the things I really like to do, and I've actually been doing for about 10 years now, is, 8 years since the original Rift and Vive came out, is to go on retailers like Amazon and Best Buy and Currys in the UK and look at the reviews from normal people about what they say about each of these headsets. Because it's fascinating to see, outside of our enthusiast bubble, what are average buyers really saying about this? And if you look at the Quest 3 reviews, people hugely appreciate the ability to be able to see their physical environment around them in color and in high quality, right? Like the difference in the pass-through between Quest 2 and this is enormous. Quest 2's pass-through is 4 pixels per degree and black and white, and this is 18 pixels per degree. It's at the point where not having to constantly take off the headset to interact with the real world while you're setting up, for example, is a big deal. When someone comes into the room, the fact that you can then just press this action button and your game automatically pauses and pass-through pops up, and you can check, what was that? Was it a pet or was it a family member? Is it just, the wind pushing the window? Is there something I need to pay attention to? All of these friction points do really genuinely matter. And so does the fact that there are other advantages to the chipset, right? Everything loads slightly faster. Games update slightly faster. I think all of these little tiny things actually come together to matter. Another thing that people don't really talk about is the controllers, right? Having these controllers they're visually more appealing and that you can bring together without smashing plastic together is a big deal. I used to watch people, I've done hundreds of VR demos throughout my time on all of these headsets. On any Ring controller, people will always smash them together and it sucks, right? There are interactions that people then stop doing. They actually feel a little bit less comfortable to do, even to reload their weapon in a game with a rifle. Whereas with this, I can bring these things right together. All of these little improvements I do think will actually be meaningful based on looking at the reviews of headsets over the years and demoing to people for 10 years now.
Yeah, very interesting discussion here about mixed reality, and it seems like they've derailed in our comments to discussing Grand Theft Auto and its disappearance from the lineup here. I think we're ready to move towards. I want to leave a comment there, but I think it's near the end of the show, and I want to make sure you respond to any final things or we cover anything else here that we need to before we move off here. But I do think there's something interesting to think about there with Grand Theft Auto as soon as we finish off the rest of this.
Yeah, Grand Theft Auto is obviously, recently we reported on that statement that it's indefinitely delayed, which I think we would both agree is PR speak for it's not happening anytime soon, if at all. But I don't think they necessarily need it. I do think to be clear, I think it's a huge miss that they announced a game like that before they were sure they should have committed it. They never, ever should have done that. But I don't think it's 100% necessary for it to be there, right? The library on this thing is starting to pick up to the point where from what we've seen of our hands-on impressions from, Henry and Don of some of these bigger games coming out, this thing is going to have the kind of library that people care about. And obviously, we're just at the very beginning of mixed reality. We're reporting every few weeks on an interesting new idea. And I do think people genuinely care about that. Even something we've seen recently is the idea of bringing these older Oculus Go games back, but floating in mixed reality. So if you have a game that is suitable to be a diorama floating in front of you, either tabletop like Demio or just floating in front of you like Augmented Empire, that kind of gaming is also very compelling. We're not saying that this thing is going to, be the biggest success ever, but I do think they have the fundamentals here to make this a success if they execute right over time, based on what kind of content they have in 2025.
All right. Any other things that we need to go into here before we close out and leave off with some thoughtful things on the way the market is developing here? People are really commenting fast today. We thank you for all the interesting comments today. I haven't been taking us off on these tangents. You've been taking us off on these tangents this week because of how lively this comment. Does that
mean we have to drink? Is that how it works?
I know, right? Okay.
No, that would be an interesting
not encourage
podcast.
That one, but yes, that is tempting to clink one together here with you. And anything else you want to talk about before we close out?
Based on the comments, and again, absolutely great quality of comments here. Really great to have this level of discussion in our comments. We can't tell you how much we appreciate it. I do think enthusiasts somewhat underestimate the importance of pass-through. Even just that, in the Quest 2 era, your home screen was a low-quality virtual environment, and now your home screen is the real world. Even just that, like when you're setting up the game, being in like situationally aware is meaningful for a lot of people, even when you don't talk about mixed reality. And I think I would very, very interested to see Meta released some statistics at Connect about like how many people are using Passthrough on Quest to do things like browser windows and YouTube. I would be very interested to hear a statistic from Meta of like how many people are using Passthrough as their background and never even use the virtual home environments anymore.
Yep. Ben here at the end saying, I think the Batman game is going to sell headsets. Yeah, we haven't even seen the launches actually arrive at the end of this year that are going to anchor the overall Quest ecosystem. There are, yeah, that is a system seller. We're going to have to go and spend a significant amount of time. We'll, come back to uploadvr.com for our review as soon as we get into that one. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are big titles that have basically been waiting for this year, and this combo of XR2 Gen 2 on two systems to sell at, and we have yet to see that push. The idea I wanted to just leave on here is I think that Steam and Flat to VR are both pointing in the same directions, that there are paths that many users will enjoy to have a VRified flat game, to have a user generated mod that builds that gets a game that you love into VR in one way or another. And previous Grand Theft Auto games are playable in VR through that same exact format, right? We've seen the videos, we've had our own reporters go and play those games. One reporter jumping out of a helicopter and tumbling down a hill, and he gets up afterwards and goes back on his journey through the whole of Grand Theft Auto, right? Like, that has been possible for years and years and years. What we're seeing, I think, is software accelerate by leaps and bounds to blur those lines, to make it more feasible, make it more comfortable to do that sort of ridiculous thing I just described for more people. And I think we're all going to arrive at the same place. I think there will be future Grand Theft Autos in VR. I don't think that's going to disappear on us. I think we'll get there. It's just, you're going to need a machine like Don Hopper's out there to probably drive that sort of thing in VR in the future.
Yeah, two things I want to just finish on, two small points. Firstly, on the computing power, I said this at the start, but we've a lot of viewers who obviously haven't joined us, have joined us halfway through. I can't stress, even as the developer of this studio right now, just how vast the performance difference is, in my experience, between Quest 2 and Quest 3S. I am really enjoying being in here in a XR2 Gen 2 headset. Normally, I am running at a lower refresh rate, lower resolution, and seeing frequent frame drops throughout the show. In this entire episode, I don't think I've seen a single frame drop, and I'm running at 120 hertz with high enough resolution that I can see my notes crystal clear. It used to be in the past, sometimes you may have noticed me like leaning in to see my notes and sometimes like saying the wrong word because my note was a little bit blurry because the dynamic resolution on Quest 2 had gone down to accommodate for, its thermals pushing performance. If you're wondering like why on earth does this studio even need a lot of performance, we have, for example, like a screen that we can see here that is a render texture of the camera view, so we can see like a rendered version of what you're seeing on a virtual floating screen over there. For example, we also have like a tablet that lets us bring up multimedia and view the live chat and all things like that. So, there are some performance costs there. And yeah, the tracking is great as well. Like the hand tracking is really just really smooth. I'm sure you've noticed us playing with it throughout the scene or throughout the show. It's remarkable how well this works. I'm even reaching it all the way over here and bringing it all the way down here. This is hand tracking. We're not using controllers at all. So yeah, from that perspective, this is a much more capable device. The last thing I want to say is that when it comes to the indication of how well Quest 3S does, there's two canaries that we'll see there. Firstly, developers who have top rated apps in the store will talk about their sales. I've already heard one. I need to wait to see whether I can say it publicly yet, but there's one developer that's shown me a chart showing the classic whoop big spike on launch week. The other thing is Meta's earnings call in Q4, which should be in January, will reveal the revenue for the Reality Labs division over the Quest 3 launch period. There will be a Meta earnings call next week, which we will come in here to report on as we always do. But it will not include Quest 3S launch. It will actually be the months before that. I don't think they'll actually have that in their accounting. As we've always seen every year, it's the next earnings call that we'll get the financials for. So we will have some developer signals and some hard numbers in the coming months. This won't always be speculative.
Yeah, and Guy is saying that their sales are flat, but that's not, that's you're a utility, not a game. And
yeah, I mean, I think some publishers have pointed out, like, if you look at the kind of core use case of virtual desktop, there's two factors here. Firstly, like, this is an enthusiast thing. The main feature that people are using your app with is to connect to a gaming PC, which I think more people would have gone maybe for Quest 3 there rather than Quest 3S. The other factor would be that there's a lot more competition now, right? So in December, Valve released Steam Link. So that wasn't a thing in the past launches. There being a free official alternative to your app from Valve. And then when it comes to the virtual monitors use case, you obviously have Horizon Workrooms and Remote Desktop and Immersed and other competitors. Although, again, to be fair, I prefer virtual desktop. I find it to be a higher quality experience for both of these use cases. I will give that to you. You have the better app, but that doesn't mean that people are going to choose it over the free alternative.
And it also doesn't mean that the 3S owners are in the market for virtual desktop, right? It's like a different, that all those PC people already got the Quest 3. I would imagine, because they wanted all the extra resolution. Yeah, there was something I wanted to talk about. People are talking about our podcast, the way we do this stream. I want to encourage you to tune into VR Gamescast on Tuesdays with Don Hopper. On the last episode of that, I saw people talking about using multitasking. I actually brought up my iPad window right here, floating in the studio, and played 18 holes of Walkabout Mini Golf with our viewers on the Gamescast while recording with Don Hopper. And it was brilliant. It all worked seamlessly, and it was a brilliant moment and a kind of a proof of concept of. I saw Silent Hill brought up here, and I was talking to James O'Loughlin about this. I'm scared of Silent Hill. I'm scared of going there. And there's an environment in Apple Vision Pro that's like this spooky, cloudy lake. One of the things I've been trying to get going with James here is I want to bring up Silent Hill up on a big, giant monitor here. And I want James to bring up his view of Silent Hill on a big giant monitor here. And I want him to share play or Steam Link connect his screen to me. And I want to Steam Link or share play my screen to him. And I want to play couch co-op, not alone, because that is the thing that keeps me from playing horror in VR. And what did I just describe? I talked about couch co-op playing flat screen games with another person who might be dozens, hundreds, or thousands of miles away from me. And man, that's really the power of VR, right? Like, suddenly I'm just not alone. I look over and know that he's got my back. He's gonna scream with me if I scream because the monster is coming at me. And I don't need full immersion for that. That's a completely flat experience made possible by VR, bringing couch co-op back to those days when we had our friend from down the street come and keep us company through that horrifying experience. So that's my dream. I mean, like, you're not even calling that VR gaming, and it's still the power of what you can do in a VR headset. And I think I leave us on that note because that's going to be a big area. That's something I want to do with more people, is play scary games in VR, not alone. All right, David, any last thoughts before we?
Yeah, no, I think more commenters just talking about that virtual desktop situation. Guy Godin claiming his sales are worse than with Quest Pro, which really should be the indication that there is something wrong with that indicator. Again, I would want to say this over and over again. Valve launched a free alternative to your app in December. Like, that wasn't there with Quest Pro. Steam Link is... If the company that people are using virtual desktop to connect to Steam, let's be real, right? They're trying to use Steam VR. Valve literally released an app that one click connects to Steam VR for free officially with the Steam brand on it. That just has to be taken into that. I don't understand why that's not being taken into consideration here. But yeah, thanks so much, everyone. We will bring you a Quest 3S review as soon as we can. We're working on that. We've got so much news. There's just been so much dropping. I worked all last weekend as well because there were so many interesting articles to view. yeah, I have a hard cut off now, so I'm gonna leave you. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Thank you to Marcellus Wilson popping in at there at the end, and thank you to all our members, patrons, and subscribers. Please become a supporter to help us do this more, grow our team, let us get to more things. We'll see you in the future. Thank you so much.